So this guy can just barge in on anyone having, fun? Such thoughts came into Daniel's mind as he carefully closed the door behind him. Unlike what he was expecting, the room was not very lavish. Standard wooden floor and walls, with a small window on the side. A bed for two which was in no way new or enchanted, due to how it looked like. A small bathroom. Daniel had no idea that the dwarf's room also had the option to rent rooms for long periods of times. Only, the owner had no choice but to hand over the master card to such a distinguished member of royalty. Locating the floorboard, Daniel got excited seeing that his step did sound different on it. His greatest fear was coming here and finding out that there was nothing inside. Using the dagger to pry open the floorboard, Daniel removed the rucksack that was inside. Inside was what he had finally been looking for. His eyes shone both with the reflection from the ether blocks and his happiness on finding what he had come for. 1, 2, 3, 10. 10 ether blocks. He had really struck a jackpot this time. This was equivalent to 100 golden lands, which was a staggering amount. Daniel had never even seen such an amount of wealth before. Along with the ether blocks was another map, made of a shiny silver material. There was also a diary. Daniel wondered if he would find clues in it regarding why the thieves had chosen to rob a house in the slums after apparently completing a high-profile robbery. This had been bothering him ever since he had heard the news about the other robbery. Later on, he had inquired with Elena for more details. It turned out that it had been a puzzling case. The actual amount of wealth stolen was little, because the thieves had actually broken into the library of a minister like Elena's father. The authorities had no clue regarding their motives. Some even said they had just gone into the wrong place, thinking it was the house's treasury. After checking the library, it was found that nothing else was missing. When Elenev had said little wealth, he had discarded it, thinking it was a measly amount. Only now did he realize his foolishness. His little and Elenev's little were two entirely different things. 100 golden lands would enable a family to set up a business in the outer city and live a comparatively lavish life. But to fighters, mages, and the true rich and influential, this was nothing. Daniel decided to leave first, remembering the priest's warning. He put everything back in the rucksack and proceeded to the door. Footsteps were heard in the wall just as he opened the door. It was a constable, who was running across the corridor while hurriedly putting on his pants. He screeched to a halt in front of Daniel, noticing the royal crest on his coat. "My lord," he said, and knelt to the ground. His pant promptly fell off, revealing blue underpants. Daniel was petrified. He had no idea what to do. If the constable raised his head, he might recognize that he was not of the nobility by seeing his face. It was the duty of constables after all to know each and every member of the royalty by face and name. The coin was in his pocket, and he could easily behead the man where he knelt. This would make sure that there would be no problems. Yet, Daniel could not bring himself to make this decision. His mind told him that this was the logical option, but his heart insisted that there must be another way. To ruthless kill someone just to avoid risk? This was something Daniel realized that he could not do yet. He had always thought that he could be ruthless if the time arose, but now that the time had come, he was frozen. He was not as ruthless as he thought he was after all. What was worse was that he even acknowledged that killing him would be best, but he kept thinking that this man probably had a family just like this which would miss him dearly. How would he feel if his father just died one day? Daniel was torn. He realized that this was a weakness. There was no way he would be able to dominate the world or even obtain justice for his father if he did not get rid of this weakness. Only, at this moment, he just couldn't get himself to do it. He racked his brain for options, and suddenly, an idea popped up in his mind. The audacity. "You have sullied my sight with such a disgusting pose. Get out of my sight," he said, immediately turning around. The constable behind him, who had stayed kneeling as per the protocol, hurried, got up and put on his pants. "Apologies, my lord. Thank you for letting me go," he said, before running towards the staircase. Daniel heaved a sigh as he heard the constable's footsteps fade away. He had no idea if he had made the right decision, but he had at least identified a weakness in himself. Only time would tell if he had made the correct choice. Just as Daniel was preparing to go to the staircase himself, the system rang in his head. Danger. Highly unstable magical vibrations detected. Host is advised to leave the present location immediately. This was the first time the system had given him a warning. Slinging the rucksack on his back, he sprinted down the steps to the ground floor. At the end of the hallway, Daniel found that this was not the entrance through which the goods and cages had come. This was because he found himself in the poshest pub he had ever seen. Although the walls and floors were still made of wood, silver and bronze glittered everywhere. Tables were made of expensive hardwood and seemed to be enchanted with auto-clean functions. The bar at the side was coated with shining gold, and bottles of exotic drinks in all colors adorned the silver racks behind it. There were only 10 people in this extravagant room. Yet, at the entrance stood 2 constables. He knew he would have no chance to pass them, especially with the clothes he was wearing now. Just as he was wondering what to do, the ground under him shook. Tables and bottles fell to the ground as the people inside the pub who had been idly drinking rose up in panic. A rumbling sound could be heard, which seemed to signal the advent of doom. Daniel ran to the door, along with the others. In the panic, he got out safely and ran into an alleyway, unlike the rest who stood outside the pub. After getting into the alleyway, Daniel turned around and finally saw what it was that had transfixed all the people on the street to just stare with shock on their faces. An enormous dragon reared its head above the roof on the rear side of the pub. It stood at least 30 feet tall, with a long neck that stretched down into the pub below. Instead of flesh and bones, the dragon was made completely out of fire. As Daniel looked closer though, he saw a white cloud beside the dragon where its wings should have been. Although only the top part was visible, it was quite clear that where the fiery body of the dragon stopped, the wings made of clouds began. This establishment has been deemed guilty of the innumerable sins reported against it. The priests of rectitude now pass down this judgment: this land shall be razed to the ground and no establishments must be set up in this location for a period of 10 years. All those who are responsible or took part in the facilitation of the fighting arena will be punished by immediate death. Glory be to Saint Rectitude. This was the same voice that Daniel had heard before, from the man in the priest's robes. Squinting, he noticed that there were actually 2 people standing on top of the dragon's head. Firewind Dragon, destroy. With these words, the dragon opened its mouth and roared at the pub. Raging flames erupted everywhere, with a few fireballs even falling near Daniel and the other spectators. The roar was actually soundless, but the rushing fire gave it the sound of destruction. A few seconds later, the dragon stopped the roar and bent backwards. 2 massive clouds that seemed to phase through the surrounding buildings rose from the ground. The dragon flapped them once, making a tornado appear out of thin air. Placed dead center in the pub, the tornado, which now had flames swirling with it, destroyed the pub, completely razing it to the ground. It was all over in a minute. Either the temperature of the flames was immensely high, or the tornado had enough power to accomplish such a massive feat of eradication in such little time. Daniel was staring at the 2 men on top of the dragon. After the deed was done, the man in midair turned towards the direction where Daniel was standing and winked. For some reason, Daniel knew it was intended for him. The 2 men instantly vanished just like before after the wink. The dragon simply faded away into the air. In less than 5 seconds, there was nothing there. Only the black smoke coming from still burning materials marked the location of the former top pub of the city, the Dwarf's Rum. System, what was that? Asked Daniel, shuddering. He was still shocked due to what he had just witnessed. Replying to host, the legendary spell Firewind Dragon was just witnessed. The only data known about this spell is that it is the standard annihilation device used by the Radical Church of Rectitude. This was magic? Daniel thought that flying through the air or making water prisons was already very awe-inspiring. What he had just seen was on a whole other level that he had never even thought to be possible. With his horizons widened, Daniel slowly walked home. He first made sure to strip down and wear his original clothes before stuffing the royal garments into a stinky sewer entrance. His parents had already slept, so Daniel entered using their alternate key hidden near the entrance to enter and sneak into his room. Stuffing the bag under his bed and making sure it was hidden from sight, Daniel drifted into the world of dreams. Dreams of flying on dragons greeted him, which made a small smile appear on his lips while the whole city was in uproar over the annihilation of the Dwarf's Rum. Early the next morning, Daniel woke up as usual, before checking if the rucksack was still there. The previous day felt like it had been a dream, and he wanted to make sure that it had actually happened. Right as he was doing his chores though, an unexpected guest showed up at the Anavrin house. It was Elenev. "Hey Prime Citizen. Forgot to collect your reward, he said, startling Daniel. He had actually forgotten that he was supposed to go collect the reward. The past few days had passed by without a single stray thought due to the focus on getting ether as soon as possible. Thanking Elena for coming, he introduced him to his parents, who were very genial. The two really did look like brothers, and this warmed his parents' hearts. The two walked toward the palace. Passing the people in the slums who seemed very amiable, Elena was puzzled. Daniel explained that this was because they were content with what they had. They treated their neighbors like family and shared whatever they could. Even his family had benefited many times from the kind people who broke their bread in half to share even if all they had was a single loaf of bread. With his eyes opened, Elenev smiled and led the way to the palace. It was Daniel's first time entering the inner city. He had only heard rumors but had never imagined that he would be able to enter so soon. A giant gate 20 foot tall was set in the wall that separated the inner and outer cities. Squads of mages and fighters were positioned all around. Daniel felt numerous eyes on him even when he was 50 feet away from the gates. Walking up to a constable on duty, Elenev said something which made him bow. Soon, a small door was opened for them in the gate. The structure of the inner city was unique. Daniel was dazed with the first sight that struck him. A wide, paved road led up to the most magnificent palace he had ever seen. The road itself was 50 feet wide, with small branching roads leading to manors on the sides. Daniel could count more than 20 spires with flags bearing the royal L fluttering in the air. Gold was the predominant theme, making the whole palace like a golden behemoth which had chosen to lie there. The entrance, which he could see from where he stood, was built in classic Roman style, with high columns and an arching roof. Behind it, a single dome rose into the sky, dwarfing all other structures near it. It was on this dome that the flag flew the highest. Daniel was awed by the sight. Elenev at the side nudged him, breaking him out of his reverie and urging him forward. Magnificent, I know. Work hard, kid. All high-level mages and fighters are granted a manor here directly by the king. Although he has his flaws, the king does know how to pull people to his side, he said, leading him to a domed building near the entrance to the palace. Daniel, here to collect the reward for becoming a prime citizen, said Elenev to the clerk who stood inside. Our youngest prime citizen. Welcome. Please wait a moment while I get your reward, said the clerk before hurrying inside. This place is usually bustling. Everyone is busy with what happened last night, said Elenev, making Daniel flinch. On asking what had happened, Daniel found out that minutes after he had left the scene, the king himself along with the court mage had appeared on the scene. The area had been cloaked by a spell, which delayed response from the army. By the time they arrived, the perpetrators were already gone. All the high-ranking clientele had escaped from the pub. This was because usually, these people carried with them escape trinkets which could instantly teleport them to a location 100 feet away. Even some employees who knew nothing about the illegal fighting ring had escaped. As for the manager of the pub and many of its employees, only ash remained of them. They are investigating everyone who survived for suspicious people. It is suspected that it wasn't just those two who were responsible for the incident, said Elenev, making sweat appear on Daniel's face. The only clues which might expose him were the guard and the clothes. The latter was trivial as the sewer would transport them to a different part of the city. He had tried to destroy the clothes, but to no avail. The clothes seemed to also be enchanted by an anti-tear spell. As for the guard, he had not seen his face. Daniel could only hope that this matter would be dismissed. There was nothing he could do now about it anyway. Here is the reward. 50 gold lands and a prime citizen badge. Showing the badge will result in expedited service at any government establishment. It can also be shown to constables or officers to deny them from arresting you unless they show a warrant granted by court. This right is exclusive to prime citizens, as normal citizens can be apprehended first, before the crime is proved. Thank you for your loyalty to the Kingdom of Lonthaner, said the clerk, handing over a jingling bag and a badge with a 3-pointed star on it. On touching it, he felt a pricking sensation, just like before with the Fists of Justice coin. Interface detected. Would you like to receive the information being transmitted? Came the expected voice from the system. On agreeing, the system said, Congratulations on becoming a prime citizen. Please carry this badge if you want to avail benefits at any government establishment. This badge is now authorized to verify the identity of prime citizen, Daniel Anavrin. It was indeed exactly like the Fists of Justice coin. Daniel thanked the clerk. He couldn't hide his smile. 50 gold lands. There was no reason to worry about the fee for the academy or food for his family anymore. Elenev dropped Daniel back home, chatting about training hall matters and laughing, reminiscing about the training. Daniel handed the money to his father, from whose eyes leaked tears of joy seeing his son accomplish so much already. He announced that he would treat everyone they knew in the slums to supper and boast about his son. Things were finally going well in the Anavrin family. Meanwhile, Daniel took out the diary that he had found at the pub. It was time to find out why two high-profile robbers had chosen to rob a house in the slums. System, summarize the diary, he said, finally touching the diary. The diary is written by one Gordon Swiftfoot, a thief who steals on commission. Detailed in the diary are his robberies and the items he stole. Most of the money obtained was spent on the dwarf's rum. What information would you like to know? Why did they come to steal my house? Asked Daniel. Gordon and his partner were contracted by a society which handles the underworld. The name is not given, but much of the information that Gordon had which enabled him to steal came from this organization. The contract was to steal a specific map located in a certain book in a minister's library. It was ordered that nothing else must be touched. On seeing that the map led to a location in the slums, namely, the Anavrin house, the pair of thieves decided that it was probably a treasure map and proceeded to sneak into the host's house to steal the treasure. A map? Daniel took out the silvery map that he had seen in the rucksack. Is this the map? He asked, staring at the contents. Affirmative. The map leads precisely to the Anavrin house. There is no other information, except for this sentence below the X-marked location. Follow the flow of ether. Follow the flow of ether? Seeing this made Daniel remember the white mists he had seen inside the energized training chamber back in the training hall. Taking out a block of ether, he said. System, how do I energize this ether to make the white mist that was there in the chamber where I trained? Pressure is required to make the ether into a gaseous form which can then be absorbed. Host must squeeze the block. Hearing this, Daniel squeezed the block between both of his hands. It turned out that the amount of pressure required was quite high, as he had to squeeze with all of his strength for quite some time for a small misty cloud of ether to come out. The block of crystal that was the ether seemed to have dimmed a bit after this small cloud came out. The small cloud first stayed in the air before gradually floating into the living room. Then, it went down and disappeared in the ground, in the exact center of the room. Is that normal? He asked, not knowing what to think. Replying to host, energized ether stays in the air after it is produced unless a wind blows it away. It does not go into the ground by itself unless someone has absorbed it and used it to temper themselves, thus changing it. Something has pulled the ether down into the ground. It is suggested that the host dig at that spot. His parents were currently outside, so Daniel had to wait, pondering on what it could be. Soon, his father came back. Dad, why did we build our house here? He first asked. Startled at the sudden question, Robert thought for a bit before answering. That's actually a funny story. There was a senile old trainer at the military academy whom I respected, although he mostly spoke nonsense. On the day that I was thrown out, he accompanied me to this spot and told me to make my home here. He said that this place would bring a lot of luck and wealth to our family. He constantly lost focus, so although it seemed like he would say something else, he changed the topic and rambled on about rising taxes. He died soon after, so I chose this place as it was his last wish to me. Why do you ask, son? I found a map on the thieves who tried to rob our house. It led to a location in the woods, where I found these blocks of ether, this diary, and this map that led to our house. The ether that I energized went into the ground. Dad, there might be something under. Can we dig here to see what it is? He lied. Robert first looked at him with disapproving eyes, before sighing. Son, I will not ask you why you did not tell me before you went to the place. What if it had been dangerous? I am glad nothing happened, but just be careful. Always remember that we are here for you, in case you need our help. Daniel felt a little pain in his heart, but he had no choice but to lie. The truth was too dangerous. Yes, let's dig here. I'll go get a shovel and something to carry the dirt. We also need a knife to cut the steel panel on the floor. Hearing this, Daniel enlarged his knife and said, Elenev lent it to me. Just the first two then, said Robert, eyeing the knife with what looked like longingness and then walking out the door. A sadness was in his eyes, as if he missed the days when he could hold his sword and stand strong on the battlefield. The desire to obtain justice only got stronger in Daniel. Soon, they started digging after cutting the steel panel. His mother also said the same thing after she came home, that they were there for him. Daniel felt lucky to have such supporting parents. The family dug through the night, up to a depth of 15 feet. The dirt was discreetly dumped in the sewer. Finally, a tong sound was heard as the shovel hit a steel object. Wiping away the dirt on it, Daniel noticed that it was a steel door at an angle of 45 degrees to the ground. There was no lock, and as Daniel pulled back the door, a burst of white mist hit him in the face. It was ether. Daniel hastily shouted, "There's something here, I'm checking it out," before ducking into the room and closing the door behind him. A misty room, 10-foot-tall cavern, greeted him. It was a round room made of rock, with numerous crystals inlaid in various patterns all around. All of the crystals were ether. Host has entered a natural energized training chamber. These chambers are very rare, occurring in only 1 out of 1,000 ether deposits. A natural formation of ether crystals allows an area to gather energized ether from the surroundings and concentrate it, effectively making it into a training chamber just like the ones used in training halls. The difference is that in the training hall, one needs to constantly replenish the ether that is being energized. A natural chamber works by gathering the ether at a location. Hence, it only stays effective until most of the ether in that area has been gathered. A certain level of ether needs to be present in the surroundings of the chamber in order for the gathering to occur. This chamber has been discovered and modified into a training chamber. A steel-like wall envelopes the natural formation, allowing it to be transported. As ether can pass through most materials, this is no hindrance. Ether has been gathered in the present location. Only the ether already present in the room can be absorbed. To gather more ether, host must change the location of the chamber. System congratulates host on finding a high-tier treasure. A high-tier treasure? In the kingdom of Lonthaner, there was an official rating system for treasures. Daniel only had limited information about it, but he did know that high-tier treasures were usually the backbone of a kingdom, judging from what Elenev had said. He couldn't believe that there was one right under the Anavrin house. The old man who had asked them to use this place must have somehow known the information. Their luck had finally turned. Daniel carefully came out of the room and climbed up the hole. When he explained it to Robert, saying that he had read about it in the library, a look of shock appeared on his face. Robert knew about natural energized chambers. This was a treasure over which wars often occurred. Once, the king had even led an expedition personally on finding out that such a chamber was located in a neighboring nation. Sadly, they had been too late and that nation had snatched up the treasure. They returned empty-handed. But when a minister had asked him if it was worth it, he said, "I am willing to sacrifice my whole army if it means that a natural chamber can be obtained. This is because obtaining one will mean that I can definitely step into the next level. It is a priceless treasure, capable of giving an unlimited supply of ether to a nation. With my increased power, I would be able to conquer the rest of the nations, building an even bigger army." These were the chilling words he had uttered. This information was carefully hidden because of its potential to cause unrest in the people. Such a ruthless king would scare people, even if it meant benefits in the long term. Robert only knew about it because he had been there by chance when those words had been uttered. Later, he had had to swear an oath that he would never repeat them. He did not hesitate to break that oath now that he was disgraced so. Hearing how valuable it was, Daniel first felt danger. It would definitely be taken away and his family killed if anyone found out that they were in possession of it. This had to be a secret that would not go outside this house. The thieves were dead and they had not finished the contract, so the person who had given the contract had no way to know where the map led to. Hence, it would be enough if they did not speak about it to anyone. Daniel asked if Robert would share the room with him to train. He declined, saying, "My path as a fighter was cut off when I was thrown out, son. I can no longer absorb ether. You must train with redoubled effort for my sake too." Holding Daniel's shoulder, an expression of longing and sadness appeared on Robert's face as he said these words. He knew how it felt to have the power of 100 bulls coursing through one's body. He had felt the sheer pump of adrenaline when his sword was buried midway in an enemy's body, warm blood shooting onto his face. Now, he had to struggle to even walk. He wished he could train again, but the damn army had used a secret technique to disperse his power and make him unable to absorb ether. Robert resented them and wished he could tear them to pieces. Seeing the anguish in his father's eyes, Daniel could not even imagine what difficulties this man had gone through. With even more determination, he started his training. He opted to use the chamber instead of the blocks, as the blocks could be saved for a rainy day. System, can I develop both my potential and my magic simultaneously? Had been his first question on the first day he had entered the chamber. Negative. It is impossible at this level. Tool, parallel processing is available in the store, but host has yet to reach the requisite level to unlock it, came the reply. Well, at least he could look forward to using it in the future. Daniel decided to concentrate on his magic. Each day, he would activate the magic development technique and meditate, feeling a piercing pain in his forehead. Day by day, he found that his vision was getting clearer and clearer. His thoughts flew faster in his mind, and even the dust particles in the air could be seen by him. He was often enamored by the simple beauty of swirling dust on a bright night. The system explained that this was because of the development of the pineal gland. The gland had certain esoteric powers which enabled such phenomena. Even on Earth, Daniel had heard of people with yogic powers who said they could decalcify the pineal gland in someone. This apparently led to clearer thoughts and less stress in life. Daniel wondered if the glands were the same in both the worlds. But, right now, he was confined to this kingdom. He had yet to find out even the name by which this world was called. The days turned into weeks as Daniel got into the training schedule, not even taking a day's break. His determination let him power through the hours and hours of prickling pain. 2 months passed in this fashion. As Daniel emerged from the chamber on the day of the selections, something was different about him. His whole demeanor had changed. The indecisiveness of youth was replaced by a calm atmosphere. His green eyes shone a brilliant hue as the rays of sunlight fell on them. His gaze had a sharpness that could make the weak-minded cower. This was the effect of decalcifying the pineal gland. Daniel had no information about a metric to test the level of his pineal gland, so he had just absorbed ether and trained in the technique each day. After 2 months of training, the amount of mist in the chamber had decreased by 10% according to the system. After freshening up and having breakfast, Viuda appeared at the door. She initially smiled at Daniel, but her smile froze when she looked into Daniel's eyes. I didn't believe it when Master told me, but now I see that he was right. You really do show the signs that you might be a mage. Hearing this made wide smiles appear on his parents' faces. After declining breakfast, Viuda said, Master sent me to take you to the selections. It is a long way from here and you might even get lost. Thank you, and please do send Master my regards, said Daniel, getting up. As they flew through the air, he noticed that he no longer felt dizzy or nauseous like before. Instead, he could now appreciate the beauty of flight and the sights that came with it. People below him hustled and bustled along their daily lives, unaware that 2 people were flying above them. Daniel enjoyed observing them, happy and vibrant as they were. Soon, they landed in front of an enormous gate in front of which a snaking line had gathered. The gate reminded him of the one that had led into the inner city, but this one was slightly smaller. The academy occupies the area east of the inner city, sharing its outer walls with it. To the west is the National Fighter Academy of Lonthaner, which occupies an equal amount of area and was built along with the Magic Academy. Although there are much less mages when compared to fighters, a lot of training grounds are required which warranted 2 identical academies being built. If you think of the capital city of Lonthaner as a circle, then think of the inner city as a C-shaped area to one side of the kingdom. The 2 academies flank the inner city on 2 sides, and in front of the inner city is the outer city. Outside that are the fields that stretch until the border walls. Each academy has an area of around 200 kilometers, said Viuda. Daniel was a little shocked as this was the most she had ever spoken with him. It seemed that she had warmed up to him for some reason. Seeing his strange look, she said, Don't be puzzled. I just take a little time to talk to new people. I'm sorry if I seemed cold to you. No, I did not feel so at all. What are the criteria for selections? He asked. Inside, he was thinking, 200 kilometers area. Man, that is huge. On Earth, that would have been a city. You will be tested for your comprehension. Comprehension is first and foremost for a mage. Potential always comes after. Of course, having high potential and high comprehension is best. Good luck. Go on in. I will be here in the afternoon to take you back. Saying so, Viuda flew up, disappearing in front of Daniel. She hadn't even given him a chance to say bye. It seemed she hadn't warmed up to him completely after all. The enormous gates had indeed started to open. A man wearing blue robes was standing inside, and when he opened his mouth, his voice reverberated throughout the surrounding. Welcome to the selections for the National Magic Academy of Lonthaner. Only kids aged 12 to 15 can enter from this point onward. Testing will end in the afternoon. Be warned, if you try to hide your age, we will know. Even the potions that you might use to change your age are made by us, so it is better not to be humiliated and kicked out. Potions could change one's age? Daniel thought as he had only ever used a simple healing potion. Around 20 people extracted themselves from the ground and walked back into the outer city, dejected. The parents left in a few minutes, leaving their children and wishing them luck. Even Daniel's parents had hugged him before he left, telling him to try his best. There seemed to be around 700 kids presently, with more constantly coming. The gates would close in 2 hours, so anyone who wanted to apply had to enter the gates before that time was up. Not wanting to dally, Daniel directly walked inside. The line had been redundant as the gates were big enough to let many people in at once. They just had to assemble in an open area designated to be for the candidates. Daniel had not expected to spot a familiar face in the crowd. It was Faxel, whom he had constantly trained with back in the camp. Although they had promised to stay in touch, both of them were too poor to own communication trinkets. Faxel also noticed him, walking to him and hugging him. He was a man of few words, so they simply entered the designated area side by side. A pleasant wind blew in the air as kids of all colors came to the location one by one. With nothing else to do, the two lied down on the grass, which felt comfortable even though it wasn't wet. Soon, around 1,500 students had assembled in the wide lawn. The time was up, so the blue-robed man appeared again in front of them. Welcome, candidates. Another year, another batch of new recruits. I know that all of you have come with high hopes to enter the academy, but let me tell you now, it is a marvel if we take 20% of all applicants each year. This is not because we don't want to admit the rest, it is because it just isn't worthy to spend the kingdom's resources on those with talent that does not suffice. The fee we charge is very little compared to the actual amount of wealth required to train mages. The comprehension test will begin soon. If you fail, do not worry, try next year. We will even give you some tips with which you might increase the probability of passing. Unless you turn 16, of course. Now, a final warning. If you are above 15, leave now. Otherwise, you will be kicked out. There was pin-drop silence as the kids heard this bitter speech. Even Daniel hadn't expected that the instructor would be this direct. No one moved. After a few seconds, the man said, "Very well. You made your choice," before flicking his fingers. The lawn under them shone with a hazy white light briefly. After the light faded, Daniel noticed that a kid nearby had a red light under him. The man flicked his finger again, and about 50 kids flew into the air. A total of 3 more flicks sounded, each of which resulted in 3 different things taking place. The first made a pile of what smelled like cow dung appear in thin air above the flying kids, drench them completely, and then vanish below them as if it had never been there. Even a few drips of dung that fell from the kids vanished into a void that seemed to have spawned under them. The second made them fly toward the open gate, while flies started to gather around them. The third made them fly out of the gate in an arc, as if they had been kicked by an invisible foot. With a thud, the gates closed immediately. Clapping his hands as if to clean them, the man spoke again in that booming voice. Now that that's taken care of, let's begin the test. With a last flick, an enormous stone statue appeared in front of the lawn in which the candidates were sitting. The statue was in a 3D shape, sort of like an open laptop from Earth. The candidates were facing the open part of the laptop. A block of wood appeared in the air on the statue, before a spark caused it to ignite and turn into ash. Beside it, a globe of water turned to ice, before shattering into tiny particles. These phenomena repeated again and again in front of their eyes, with new blocks of wood and water turning into ash and snow indefinitely without stop. Your task is to observe these 2 things commonly seen in nature and analyze them. After that, you must explain how they took place. Let me give you a clue, because of a spark and because it became cold aren't the correct answers. If you have the talent to become a mage and stand above all, you will see something. No speaking, if even a word comes from your mouth, you will be immediately disqualified. You have 2 hours. If you feel that you already know the answer, then feel free to walk up to the statue and touch it, thinking about your answer. Your result will be one of 9 grades. The first 7 are the colors of the rainbow: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange and red, with violet being the lowest grade and red being the highest. Above that are the 2 legendary grades: crimson and gold. A candidate with such potential has not appeared in decades, and each one is a treasure of the kingdom, nurtured with the highest of resources into becoming a backbone of the kingdom of Lonthaner. The passing grade is yellow. Although other academies might accept those with even violet potential, the academy has very strict regulations. Your test begins now. A huge clock appeared at the size, ticking down to 0 from 2 hours. Daniel was unperturbed, because he knew this was something that he would definitely excel at. System analysis complete. Reason identified. The reason for the wood. Wait. It's already done, Daniel screamed in his mind, interrupting the system for the first time. Of course, it had interrupted him too. Affirmative. This is a very simple phenomena, and even phenomena analysis module 1 would have been able to analyze it in under a few minutes. Okay, don't tell me the answer. I want to try out the test myself, said Daniel. He had noticed the change in his perception from the 2 months of decalcification and wanted to test out the result himself. Acknowledged, came the reply, to which he nodded. Daniel was excited to find out his true potential. This wish primarily came from the desire to not depend on the system too heavily. If he did so, the minute the system was gone, he might become completely helpless. Instead, by also doing things himself without the system's help like he had done in the Hell training, he would improve his mind and grow. Folding his legs, Daniel sat down comfortably before focusing his full attention on the scenes in front of him. For the first half hour or so, Daniel was mesmerized by the sheer beauty of the scenes in front of him. With his improved eyesight, he could see each part of the wood that was set alight with clarity. Even more than the wood, the incredible patterns that formed in the ice when the water froze were even more dazzling. Slowly, he started to see tiny particles. There were different kinds of particles in the water and the wood, with different colors. As the red particles of the spark came into contact with the myriad ones in the wood, some reaction seemed to occur as all of the particles turned into red, which was the fire. Something similar happened with the water. Light blue particles came into contact with deep blue ones and became deep blue themselves. It was as if he was gazing into a different dimension. As he looked around, he noticed that the whole world seemed to be made up of these particles. Myriad colors of myriad shades greeted him, and his brain seemed to be overloaded with all of the information. Suddenly, he felt a stabbing, excruciating pain in his forehead which made him close his eyes. As he opened them again, his gaze was back to normal. Ding. Elementary sight tool obtained. System congratulates host on obtaining a tool by himself. Elementary sight, the world is made up of many countless particles. Although they are called elementary particles, they are not tied to the elements. The elementary sight allows one to gaze at these particles. The amount of particles that can be seen at a time without overloading the brain grows with the mage's level. So what is my comprehension level? I saw that the interaction between the particles was the cause for the transformation, he asked apprehensively. Host's comprehension level, crimson. Prolonged decalcification and expansion of host's pineal gland has allowed host to reach the legendary level of comprehension for new mages. Crimson potential corresponds to noticing the particles and their interactions. Gold potential corresponds to noticing a possible underlying reason for said conversion of state, namely, change in the vibrations of the particles. Such an observation was possible due to Phenomena Analysis Module 2. It would be almost impossible for a mage to notice this. Host's comprehension itself is already considered legendary. Yes. Legendary comprehension. And he had achieved it himself without the help of the system. Of course, without the system, there was no way his pineal gland could have been decalcified in the first place. Yet, such legendary comprehension was his alone. System, can you make any grade I wish appear during the test? Affirmative. Violet to gold, any grade of comprehension can be simulated for the result of the test. It was just as he thought. Daniel now had a tough choice to make. Should he choose the legendary level and obtain all the resources possible? Or should he choose a lesser grade and be low-key? Daniel did not like either of the options. The first meant that he would be under the purview of the government at all times. They would take an active role in his development, potentially supervising everything he did. Like the man had said, it had not been seen in decades, and they would definitely show this much care for one who could be the backbone of the kingdom. Choosing a low level was also not what Daniel wanted. If he was being frank with himself, he would say that it was because he had had enough. Enough of being in the bottom. Enough of being looked down upon. As for resources, he had the incredible treasure that was the natural training chamber. Before he made his choice, Daniel asked one last question. Is it possible for a mage's comprehension to change? Yes, in very rare cases. Typically, the comprehension is linked to the size and decalcification level of the pineal gland. It is possible for the human body to unconsciously apply ether in the same way the system did, albeit for a short time and in very, very rare situations. As the information regarding the glands has still not been discovered in this world, it is assumed that this is due to being blessed by the heavens. A plan started to form in Daniel's mind after hearing this. Taking everything into purview, Daniel made his choice. The 2 hours gradually came to a close, and kids started walking up to the statue one by one. The first seemed to be a rich merchant's daughter, wearing an expensive gold-trimmed dress that reached her ankles. Unlike the spoiled brats Daniel had seen in the training, she had a kind expression on her face and gave a small smile at the crowd before placing her hand on the statue. The vertical part of the statue flashed a brilliant white before turning into 9 layers of dim colors, each color corresponding to each grade. A white wave of color started ascending from the bottom soon after. As it passed each color, it lit up that bar/grade into a dazzling hue that almost blinded the spectators. Violet, indigo, blue, green, and yellow were lit up brilliantly before the white wave finally slowed down. It settled down into orange, making many kids gasp as the vivid color almost seemed to assault their eyes. High-grade comprehension. Well done. Welcome to the academy. Would you like to take me as a master? Asked the blue-robed man, startling the girl who was now smiling wide after taking her hand off the statue. Ahem. A cough was suddenly heard in front of the statue, which made the blue-robed man's face turn pale. Never mind about the master. You can pick one later. Come stand behind me. With high-grade potential, you will definitely go far in the path of the mage. I believe you can directly enter the top class, which has the best teachers and resources, other than the legendary class which has been empty for decades. One by one, the kids walked to the statue apprehensively. Seeing the kid with the orange grade comprehension, Daniel had somewhat assumed that everyone would at least have violet grade comprehension. This was not the case. Over half of them simply did not elicit any reaction from the stone. They tried everything they could, with one kid even trying to sleep on the statue, hoping that more contact with his body might result in a comprehension grade. All of them were mercilessly shown the door by the blue-robed man. To those who had at least yellow grade potential, he was genial and warm. Those who scored below didn't even garner a glance. One kid whose wave had stopped just shy of yellow even begged the man, holding his coat tails. He was levitated out of the gate immediately. Daniel was struck by the harshness of the institution. These were just kids. Wouldn't such a treatment wound their psyches and affect their development? As he was pondering on the matter, the kid walking toward the statue fell down suddenly as if he had hit an invisible wall. From the distance, a procession of guards and servants could be seen. It seemed like they had automatically appeared at that location, as the others would have definitely noticed them if they had walked here. The sound of drums heralded the approach of an orange-haired 12-year-old who wore royal robes much more lavish than the ones Daniel had stolen in the dwarf's room. A coat was draped on his shoulders over the golden-green robes, with the majestic royal crest shining on it. He walked as if he owned the land under him, signs of authority already apparent over his young, freckled face. My lord, we could have brought the testing apparatus to your residence. There was no need to trouble yourself with coming, said the blue-robed man. Daniel noticed that he did not kneel like the rest of the people who had addressed nobility in front of him so far. It was no trouble. I just wanted to show these peasants what high talent was. It would give them a goal to work towards and toil harder, said the kid in an uncharacteristically high-pitched and confident voice. My lord, you were born in the most auspicious time. You could speak at the tender age of 6 months, and only at 12, you have mastered the art of visualization. You definitely have legendary talent. I bet 100 gold lands that my lord has the highest comprehension in the whole academy, said a man in a white robe who had been hidden behind the guards. As he said so, 5 more similarly dressed people appeared from behind, shouting. 150 gold lands on the Majesty. 200. 250. 500. There is no way that anyone can match my lord. The last man wore the most extravagant clothes, with a gold and silver trim and diamond buttons. The kid smirked before walking up to the statue and looking at the scenes for a few seconds. That's it? PFF, he said, walking up to the statue and touching it. The white wave seemed to be the strongest that had appeared, so it blazed through the first 6 colors before finally slowing down. Finally, a radiant red shone on the statue, eliciting claps and cheers from the guards and the men who had been in his retinue. Top grade comprehension. Top grade. My lord has unlimited potential. Near legendary potential. Thank you, my lord, for letting us witness such a scene. The kid turned and smiled at the man who had said the last statement. He then proceeded toward the blue-robed man. Congratulations, my lord. Continue the test, he said, which made the kid grimace and return. It looked like he had been expecting more compliments. How can others have the face to even test themselves in front of my lord's talents? They would get too discouraged. It's a 1 in 100,000 talent. Of course there's no one who could pass my lord. The kid smirked hearing these comments, choosing to stay and spectate. The smirking expression somewhat irked Daniel. In the kid, he saw the arrogant prince who had been the reason for getting his father kicked out of the army. He really wished he could smack him across the face. Of course, this was impossible, physically. Hence, Daniel decided on the next best plan. Hearing the comments of the men, the kid who had been going to test next had sat back down on the lawn, losing his confidence. No one seemed willing to walk up to test at this moment. Just as the blue-robed man was going to shout again urging them to go, he saw Daniel stand up and walk towards the statue with a confident stride. The men who noticed this sneered. Kid, you have some guts. You think you can beat my lord? 500 gold lands say you can't, said the man in the extravagant clothes, taking out a bag full of jingling coins. Daniel had had enough of being low-key. In all of his 2 lives, he had stayed under the feet of such men, cowering in fear. Enough was enough. You better keep your word, he said, shocking the kid and the men before nonchalantly putting his hand on the statue. A brilliant white wave cascaded upwards from the base. It seemed as if nothing could stop it as 6 colors were lit up and passed in a moment. Even the red that the Lord had been so proud of was crossed in an instant. A scintillating crimson lit up the whole field. The spectators collectively dropped their jaws seeing this legendary color appear in all of its glory. Only, something strange happened with the wave as it suddenly fell back to the red bar. Although the crimson had appeared only for a second, it stayed in everyone's eyes, as if burned into their brains. This was the effect of a legendary color. Even the red that it finally settled on shone much more vividly than the former kids had. Pseudo-legendary comprehension. One who has the potential to reach the legendary comprehension level and climb to the peak of all mages. The heavens have blessed my kingdom, said the blue-robed man who looked like he had just glanced his eyes upon the most precious treasure in the world. Ding asterisk. Danger detected. Host must dodge to the right. An enormous ball of fire and lightning hurtled Daniel's way as this urgent voice rang in his head. Daniel immediately tried to jump to the right, but he was just too slow. The destructive ball that had fire at the center with electricity crackling all around it made its way toward him, as if to mark his inevitable demise. A bald man with a strong back suddenly stepped out of the space in front of him. He was wearing the clothes of a lumberjack, with a leather coat and gray trousers. For some reason, seeing this visage made Daniel feel safe. The man simply waved his arm and the ball was deflected, impacting a tree a few feet away where no one was present. The explosion that followed shocked Daniel. Just the shock wave made him fall on the ground, bewildered as he felt his hair being buffeted by the pure waves of destructive force. It had been a tree so thick that 2 men would have been required to hold it, and there was now nothing left it. Only the grim, burnt shape of the tree was present, which collapsed into dust from the wind. The ground itself was scorched and there seemed to be a static electricity in the air, making the hair on everyone's hands stand up. The man bent his head, gazing at the lawn where all the kids sat. One kid, with tanned skin and torn clothes, screamed before being lifted off the ground. Something seemed to be pressing down on him from all sides, which made him undergo a grotesque transformation. His legs and hands grew in front of their eyes, causing blood and skin to quickly wither and fall. His head became larger, morphing into that of a man. Eventually, a fully grown man in torn clothes that were threatening to burst was in the air, bleeding from almost every inch of his skin. "Glory be to Axeler," he screamed with anguish and pain on his face, before his body started to burst apart. An ominous feeling was felt in the air as Daniel was reminded of suicide bombers back on Earth. The man who had just appeared simply flicked his hands and a visible, transparent bubble appeared around the kid who had just morphed into a man. Time seemed to stop in that bubble, as the disintegration and possible explosion of the man's body was stopped in its tracks. Stopping time. This was such a legendary power that Daniel had thought it wouldn't be possible no matter how much one trained. Although it was only in a small area, Daniel was awed by this tremendous display of power. The ball immediately vanished in the air before the man turned towards Daniel. "Good thing I recently developed a clone, otherwise a young man of such incredible talent would have been taken from my kingdom." "Daniel, isn't it?" he asked, stretching out his hand. The man had strong, blocky features with dark skin. Although he was bald, a short beard was around his mouth, somehow accentuating the ruggedness in his image. His shoulders and back were huge, more than half as wide as Daniel was tall. Daniel shook his hand in a daze. That was a spy from the neighboring kingdom of Axeler. Using forbidden techniques, one's age can be reversed while maintaining their power, albeit at the extreme cost of one's lifespan. "Ah, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Kellier, court mage of the kingdom of Lonthaner. My magic exists to protect the people of Lonthaner, be they commoners or nobility. I report only to the king, and he is the only one in this kingdom who can command me." "Kid, it is nice to meet you," he said. It was the fabled court mage. A man above all in the kingdom but below only one. Daniel had heard of the stories. The court mage's journey in magic was a peculiar one. He had been a woodcutter who loved his work. With years and years of concentration and constant honing of his techniques, he had learned by himself how to control and coax wood elementary particles to give way to his axe. A passing mage had seen this phenomena and been shocked. Then 23 years old, the woodcutter was immediately taken to the kingdom and tested for comprehension. He had an incredible crimson-level comprehension that awed everyone. Since then, the previous court mage had groomed him before going out into the world after leaving him in his stead. He still wore the clothes of a lumberjack because that was what he was most comfortable in. Known as the second strongest man in the kingdom, he was said to be wise. Yet, he was not strong enough to oppose the king's wishes, he could only comply with them. Seeing Daniel still staring at him as if he had seen a ghost, Kellier chuckled before turning to the kid who was glowering at the side and saying, "Showing off again, Laravel? Didn't I tell you to take the test in the palace? Why are you here?" The kid had been staring at Daniel with a harsh glare. Hearing the court mage's words though, his expression quickly turned into one of fear. "Mr. Kellier, I was just taking a walk and wanted to check out the test. I'll take my leave now," he said, before immediately turning around with his whole retinue and leaving. His back though, seemed to be shaking and Daniel felt that the story between them wasn't over. The man who had placed the bet before also turned around and tried to leave, but try as he may, his legs seemed to be rooted to the ground. Understanding why, he turned around and bowed to Kellier before leaving the bag of gold lands on the ground. "You won that money, kid. I was watching your performance. It does feel good to oppose and smack people like these in the face, but be cautious, making enemies is not wise. This kid though is not one you need to worry about. He's just a little too concerned about his face. He had 2 hours to see the same scenes in the palace, but still he chose to come here and show off. I should teach him a lesson, but that's the king's job, seeing as how he is his son after all," he said in a low voice that only Daniel could hear. Daniel nodded before walking up to the bag and retrieving it. It was very heavy, and Daniel did not regret challenging the prince. For once, he just could not be bothered about the consequences. As for being cautious? If the court mage knew that he could show gold potential and give everyone a heart attack but still chose a pseudo-legendary potential, he would definitely shut his mouth and not speak about caution anymore. After Daniel's return, the man stretched out his arms as if to welcome him and said, "Welcome to the National Magic Academy of Lonthaner. Kid, you have the highest comprehension of all of the present students in the academy, be they nobility or commoners. Hence, many eyes will be on you. You are now an asset of the kingdom and no external forces can harm you, but spars are allowed between students to promote fighting skills after the first year in the academy. The complete course takes 6 years. In the first year, the basic elements will be taught with optional classes for some specialized forces of nature. At the end of the first year, there will be a test which decides what your main focus will be as a mage. Both mages and fighters are limited by a lifespan of 100 years in the human realm. It is only when one becomes a warrior that there is an increase in the maximum lifespan. Hence, mages must choose their specialization and focus on it to reach the apex. Remember the saying, humans perish, warriors march on. Since you have pseudo-legendary talent, I will appeal to the king and the Academy's council to place you in the legendary batch that has been empty since decades. Let's see how it will go. Take care, kid. Work hard, and be smart. I'll come meet you once I know if you can be shifted to the legendary batch, but until then, you are a member of the top-grade batch, said Kellier, placing his hand on Daniil's shoulder. His rough calluses could be felt even through Daniil's shirt, as if he still spent his days cutting wood, even being the court mage of a kingdom. Daniil nodded, wondering why this man was being so nice to him even though he had offended the king's own son. As for that kid Laravel, be wary. He has always been shrewd and his only weakness was showing off. He may try to take revenge when you least expect it. In the first year, all fights are strictly forbidden, so for now, just concentrate on your studies. As the court mage, my gaze will always be on the whole kingdom. That was how I knew you were being attacked. I will take my leave now, he said, before again vanishing into thin air. Daniil had not spoken a single word. All of that information had been dumped on him and he was now left alone holding the bag of coins. As he analyzed everything, the testing was progressing until only a few students were left. Soon, it was done. The blue-robed man sent all of the crying kids who had failed out and personally escorted the selected candidates to a lavish building. Faxel had also been selected, albeit only by the passing grade. Together, they began their academy life. The hostel building was at least 10 stories. Apparently, there were over 1,000 individual rooms inside, divided into the male and female sections. But, it had been centuries since the academy operated at full capacity. Now, it was considered a good year if even 30% of the rooms were occupied. Daniil chose an individual room and paid the first year's fee with the coins he had won in the bet. After confirming his entry into the top-grade batch and obtaining his ID, it was time to go home. That night was one that would be remembered by everyone in the slums. Both Robert and Maria were in tears hearing that their son had gotten into the most prestigious academy in the kingdom. The huge amount of money he had earned was the icing on the cake, along with the fact that they would all be moving out of the slums to go to the designated living area for NMAL students' families. This living area was located opposite to the academy and Daniil had already taken the key to a standard villa. They had decided to move the next day and this was their last day in the slums. Robert wanted to throw a huge party in the slums to thank everyone that had made their journey here so far as pleasant as it could be. Times were hard for everyone, but they had always been willing to spare whatever they had. Carts and carts of food and alcohol were ordered and everyone ate and drank to their heart's fill. The constables were puzzled to see the always drab slums shining with such vitality, and when they went to check, they were also invited to the party. The whole night was spent reminiscing about both the tough and happy times. Daniil was constantly with his parents, who couldn't stop showing him to everyone and endlessly boasting about him. Everyone obliged, knowing that the couple were the happiest they had been in years. Even Daniil could not stop smiling and laughing throughout the night, seeing his parents' infectious atmosphere. All too soon, the morning came and it was time to pack. There wasn't much luggage to begin with, but Daniil and Robert first carefully covered up the entrance to the natural training chamber and removed all signs that the house hid such a secret. The house would still stay, as that small patch of land was theirs. A trustworthy friend was asked to live here and immediately tell them if anyone came snooping. Daniil decided to transport the natural chamber as soon as he was powerful enough to do so, and set up some warning trinkets to be notified if anyone came near. This chamber might be the bedrock on which he would build his future of dominating the world. The villa was not too big, situated in a plot of land of 400 square yards, and having a simple interior with 2 floors and 4 bedrooms. Still, it was just the two of them and both Robert and Maria were ecstatic. After everything was settled in, Daniil handed over most of the money to his dad and told him to use it as he saw fit. He said that they had taken care of him all these years, and it was high time he did something for them. After countless protests, Robert only acquiesced after Daniel threatened to throw the gold away if he did not take it. With all of his matters settled, Daniel started his academy with a fresh mind. All that was on it right now was to study hard and gain as much power as possible in the shortest time in order to take revenge for his father. Even if everything was okay now, those years of suffering and that look of anguish on his father's face still haunted him. The timetable that had been given to him was like a computer from Earth, only it just looked like a simple piece of parchment with the information on it changed frequently. The first class was called Introduction to the Elements and was designated to take place in Lawn 5. There was also a map on the parchment, with his present location clearly marked, which moved as he did. Memories of the magnificent Firewind Dragon came to mind as he made his way to class, looking forward to the day when he could also be in control of such awe-inspiring magic. The top grade batch only contained 30 students, whose comprehension was at least orange level. Included in these students was of course, the Prince Laravel. Of the others, Daniel was surprised to see that more than half of them were wearing royal robes, albeit less lavish than Laravel's. A staggering 18 of the 30 students were seated on wooden chairs in the lawn, looking around with smiles on their faces. As for the rest, they all seemed to be sons and daughters of rich merchants. Daniel seemed to be the last into the class, as there was only one remaining chair at the very end. Getting seated, he turned to talk to the commoner beside him, but was met with a grunt after which the kid completely ignored him. Feeling someone's gaze on him, he turned around to see Laravel staring at him with a smirk on his face. So this was his doing, thought Daniel. Just as he was wondering why this kid was playing such a childish trick, the familiar blue-robed man appeared in front of him. "Welcome to your first day in the academy," he said with a jovial smile on his face. "My name is Henry, and I will be your general element teacher for the rest of your stay at the academy. My goal is to expose you to as many elements as possible to let you find out the element that you are most comfortable with. That element will be the one you will focus on, and the one that you will be most adept with." With this introduction started Daniel's first year in the academy. The first class was spent detailing how elements worked, namely exactly what he had seen in the comprehension test. Although most of them had seen it for themselves, it still had to be explained so that they could confirm it in their minds. In the evening, Daniel found out that the little prince had ordered everyone in the academy to stay away from him. Faxel told him this before being the same with him as he always was, making Daniel feel happy that he had a friend he could depend on. He couldn't care less if he didn't make more friends, because his main objective was to gain knowledge and power. With this in mind, he set a strict schedule for himself, which he would adhere to no matter what. In the morning, classes would be held where various teachers would demonstrate and guide them on feeling different elements. The goal of a mage was to gain control by making a connection using their pineal gland with the elementary particles in the outside world to achieve the desired effect. On the second day of classes, they had a potential test. This in itself demonstrated how much more important comprehension was compared to potential. This was when Daniel found out that mages could improve potential by advancing in levels, although the effect was slow. The royal family was said to possess a secret technique which would hasten this process, but again, it came with certain side effects. According to the system, the decalcification level of the pineal gland corresponded to potential and the size corresponded to comprehension. Daniel was surprised to know that he had an high-grade pineal gland already before he used the Madrid development technique, but it had been completely calcified. The prince had scored a top-grade potential and he had been hoping that Daniel would have trash potential, although he knew that such a disparity between potential and comprehension was impossible. Justifiably so, Daniel scored a high-grade potential, as his pineal gland had only undergone 2 months of decalcification. The prince gnashed his teeth seeing this, but it seemed the court mage was right. He did not try to spar him or harm him in any way. The childish trick he had done before now seemed suspicious to Daniel as he remembered from the court mage's words that the little prince was actually shrewd. Yet, there was nothing he could do about it now. After the morning of classes, students would spend time in an energized training chamber, because such an environment made it easier to notice and interact with the elementary particles. Afterwards, students could do whatever they wish. Typically, many went into the woods or to other locations to spend more time meditating on forming a connection. For Daniel, it was the time to gather knowledge. The academy had the largest library he had ever seen in his life, containing over 100,000 books. Thankfully, it also had podiums like the town library for easy access. Day by day, he spent the time from evening to night gathering as much information as he could. Due to his proximity to many mages, the system output spells almost every day. Yet, Daniel had tough choices to make as he could not develop and use everything. He needed to figure out his fighting style and his focus for the future. He did not want to ever be in a situation like before, when someone had to save him from certain death. As the information and techniques accumulated, Daniel slowly started making the plan. His day now also included practice sessions in the woods, where no one knew exactly what it was he was practicing. In such a way, the first year at the academy breezed by. There were very few holidays, and Daniel had spent them relaxing with his family, who were happier than ever. Finally, it was time for the year-end assessment and main element selection. Although there had been no fighting classes in the first year, the first test was actually a spar. This was to see how students would fight on their own without training using instinct. Of course, those who could hire private instructors were at an advantage. Yet, most seldom did, as they did not want one's path to be constricted to a specific training at such an early level. Daniel had almost been forgotten by most, despite having pseudo-legendary talent. He had just been lost in his schedule, growing day by day. Now, it was finally time to remind them of his existence. The first-year assessment was one of the most major events in the National Magic Academy of Lonthaner. Most people judged the future potential of a mage by his/her performance in this assessment. This was because many believed that what one could achieve in a single year was a strong sign of what they would be able to achieve throughout their lives. The sprawling lawns of the academy were the default location of the assessment. A podium was specially erected at one side, with numerous chairs placed on top and one enormous throne dwarfing them all. The throne seemed to be made of some alloy of gold, shining in the sun, with the two lions that were carved on the hand rests looking like they wanted to leap out into the open fields. On the day of the assessment, the whole academy was gathered at another side of the lawn, which was designated as the spectator seating area. The seats were slowly filling up, with the front rows already occupied who had come early specifically to experience the front row action. Another major reason for the enthusiasm of the spectators was that the strongest man in the whole kingdom would be present at the assessment. It was the king of Lonthaner himself, who would spectate to see how the future mages of the kingdom were progressing. The king was seldom seen outside, always busy training and focusing on improving himself to provide a stable life to the kingdom. Although he had a few flaws, many commoners still blessed him every day in their hearts for being able to provide Lonthaner with an atmosphere where they could flourish. Of course, there were also many that cursed him due to his overt partiality in the matter of the royal family. He supported almost any and all of their actions, letting them wreak havoc on many commoners' lives. Daniel's family was one such family who had been affected. Soon, it was time for the assessment. All of the students had gathered a half hour beforehand out of respect for the king. Right as the clock struck the time that the assessment was supposed to start, two men appeared on the podium, which had already become filled by dignitaries from other academies or training halls. It was the familiar court mage and a man with broad shoulders. A reddish-gold coat lay lazily on his back, with the royal crest displayed for all to see. The man wore the chainmail of a soldier underneath the coat. Only, the chainmail seemed to be made of an alloy similar to the one in the throne. He had a gaunt face, almost as if he had just woken up from sleep. Long, silver hair was draped over his shoulder, extending down to below his chest as his piercing eyes gazed at everyone around him as if scanning for danger. His nose was crooked, as if it had been broken many times, and his lips were thin, compressed into a line. Each and every person on whom his gaze fell could only cower. As one, the spectators and the dignitaries knelt, lowering their heads. Daniel had no choice but to kneel for this power-hungry, uncaring king whose only aim was to grow in power. It was thoughts like these that made Daniel think back to the first words of the system that he was destined to conquer and dominate the world. Maybe a change in leadership really was needed in this kingdom where the nobility could do whatever they wished with no one to stop them. Even someone who could be the future backbone of the kingdom was ignored, making him feel that the leadership's priorities were just not right. The king sat down without a word, and the court mage walked forward and proclaimed, "Let the assessment begin." With these words, the first-year assessment got underway. There were around 300 students in the first year, and it was impossible for spars to occur between all of them. Hence, there was first a weeding process in which only the most promising candidates would be chosen. All of the students arranged themselves in rows as per the judge's instructions. In an empty space in front of them, 20 wooden puppets appeared. They were humanoid, with featureless faces. Take the puppet test in batches of 20. Whoever knocks down the puppet before the puppet reaches you passes and goes on to the next round, announced the judge. The first batch of puppet testing was soon underway. The objective was to test the speed of the young mage's connection with whatever elementary particle they chose to make a simple spell to knock down the puppet. The puppets were designed to fall no matter what spell hit them, be it a small fireball, a gust of air, or even a sprout of water. These were all simple spells that had been taught to them in their first year. Various individuals had various levels to which they could connect with elementary particles and coax them to change to their will. Ones with high comprehension could directly see the particles, making it easy for them to use their magic to influence them. As they had been taught, the key was visualization. The stronger they could visualize, influence, and connect to the particles, the better result a spell would give. A spell was basically just an instruction on how to connect. Simple spells required simple instructions. More powerful spells meant more complex instructions, which required more advanced levels of mages. A mage only increased in level when she could control a set number of particles. According to the system, this had a direct correlation with the decalcification of the pineal gland. The pineal gland was basically like an onion, and with each level, each layer of the gland would be decalcified and peeled off. The main problems that the young mages faced at this stage was being able to throw a spell at the puppets which ran towards them. They only had a minute to do so, and even students who had orange level comprehension found this hard. Students with red comprehension breezed through, just using a simple fireball or ice shard. Laravel was of course showed off the most, using a lightning bolt and making everyone gasp. Lightning bolt spells weren't part of the first year's curriculum, after all. In the sixth batch, it was Daniel's turn. With a calm expression, he walked onto the designated position and waited for the puppet to charge. Almost all of the academy had their eyes on this kid who had made waves in the kingdom due to having pseudo-legendary potential. Only, many were puzzled when he was treated the same as one with red-level potential. Even the king, who had been slouched lazily on his throne, sat up, noticing that Daniel had taken the stage. The puppet started running toward Daniel at a medium pace, giving him exactly 60 seconds to throw a spell. Daniel, though, just stood there with his arms folded as if he weren't the one who was taking the test. After 30 seconds had passed, he was yet to move, looking around at some of the students who were struggling to connect and send instructions to the elementary particles. At 20 seconds, he finally looked at the puppet for the first time since the test. At 10 seconds, a few people started to say that the test had definitely been bogus and he was just trash. Even the judges and the court mage was puzzled seeing Daniel's nonchalance. Thump. The puppet, which had been running towards Daniel, suddenly slipped and fell, skidding to a halt in front of him with its head almost touching his foot. The spectators were startled beyond belief seeing this peculiar scene take place. Had Daniel done something in that 5 seconds? Or had the puppet just slipped? Did it even count as a pass if the puppet just slipped? They wondered, while the court mage and the king stared at Daniel with their eyes wide open, as if seeing a monster. Pass, declared the judge, bewildering everyone who were wondering just what had happened. Look. The ground became soft just under the puppet's foot, said one spectator who was seated in the front row. Hearing this, everyone strained their eyes to see the ground. The lawn they were in had a distinct look to it for the most part, with neatly packed and dry earth. It was only at one small spot that the ground had become muddy and wet. It just so happened that the puppet slipped at that exact spot and fell, hitting the ground. Monster, mouthed the spectators, realizing just what he had done. The main reason for one to be amazed was that this was actually the easiest way to pass the test. But, it required the control of 2 types of elementary particles in a short span of time. One would first have to connect with the water vapor in the air, turning it into a ball of water, and then connect with the earth, coaxing it to get wet due to the water. One's magic would have to be quick and efficient, and one would have to have very high comprehension in order to have this level of control at such an early stage. The stage of a mage decided how many elementary particles she could connect with and control, while the comprehension decided her speed in connecting and controlling the particles. Daniel walked calmly to the place where all of the selected candidates for the spar were seated. Laravel was already here, and he looked at Daniel from behind his back with a cunning expression. Daniel couldn't care less. What he had done so far, making the rest of the students stay away from, had actually helped him in his first year. For company, he had Faxel and his parents. What more did he need? This allowed him to focus on his schedule completely. The next student in line also happened to be one with red grade comprehension. Seeing the reaction of the crowd and the people on stage, he also wanted to show that he had talent worth admiring. Folding his hands like Daniel, he stood there. But unlike Daniel, the effect was ruined because he had to stare at a patch on the ground to form a ball of water above it. It looked like he was throwing a tantrum at the ground instead of the cool image that he had in mind. A ball of water soon formed in front of everyone's eyes before splashing on the ground just before the puppet approached the spot. Only, the dry ground did not absorb the water, staying dry and letting the puppet pass unhindered. Although the kid realized that what Daniel had done was much more complicated than it appeared, it was too late. The puppet had already reached him, and he had failed. This impressed on the crowd even more what an incredible feat Daniel had done for his stage. Even the court mage and the king occasionally glanced at Daniel, as if making sure he wouldn't run away. Soon, it was time for the spars. Sparring occurred with the drawing of lots, where every candidate would be given a number and would draw a lot to decide their opponent. Only 30 students had passed the first test. Daniel walked up to the court mage who was holding the lots and drew a number. It was 17. All the students were wearing their own numbers on their chest, so Daniel looked around to see that it wasn't Laravel. He really wanted to beat that kid up, although what he had done had not affected him very much. Being slighted in such a way had managed to leave a bad taste in Daniel's mouth, which he had to wash away. The spars soon started, with 2 orange grade students facing each other. Daniel was puzzled. What was happening here was way beyond what his expectations here. Both mages stood a few feet away, concentrating on the air as if trying to form something there. The judges had announced that students would be transported out immediately in case they were going to get injured, which put them at ease. Gradually, a fireball and an ice shard each formed in front of him. Only, the fireball was just a little bit faster to form and was shot forward earlier. Although the ice shard was also on the way, the fireball almost hit the other party first. Instantly, the other student was outside the ring and the first was declared to be the winner. The crowd cheered as if watching a good show. This was sparring. Wasn't this too childish? Thought Daniel. He had trained extensively for this spar, and it now turned out that these kids just competed in spell casting times. The second round had a bit of a difference. The students facing each other in this round had a red grade and an orange grade comprehension level respectively, and the latter knew he could not compete with the other in spell casting time. Thus, seeing the last match, he ran toward his opponent in an attempt to knock him down. It seemed that this kid had also trained as a fighter, as he ran quite fast and was at the opponent in only a few seconds. Only, just before he could punch into the opponent's stomach, he found himself outside the ring. The crowd laughed as they saw him stumble and fall, with no opponent to bury his fist in. On asking, he found out that an ice shard had formed out of his vision just before he hit his opponent. The ice shard would cause much more damage, penetrating him and even killing him had he not been teleported out. Sighing, he realized that mages were not so easily beaten and resolved himself to train harder. Soon, it was Daniel's turn. His opponent was from his own class, a kid wearing noble robes and possessing red comprehension level. PFF, what pseudo-legendary. That thing with the puppet must surely have been a fluke. Allow me to put you in your place, he said cockily before concentrating on the air in front of him. The signs of a fireball already appeared in front of him, showing that he was quite skilled. Just like the first test, Daniel just stood there looking around. He had decided that he would give everyone a show, and he would do so no matter what. His intention was to get noticed by the king or the court mage and become entitled to more resources and teachers. This was because all of his classes only gave him basic levels of spells. The system had already developed all of them in just the first month, and in the rest of the time he had no choice but to waste his time with them. Even the books in the library that detailed advanced spells were locked to him due to him being a first year. He wanted to obtain the power to choose what he would do with his time himself. He wanted to be granted unlimited access to the library and become able to learn whatever he wished to. For this goal, he had practiced extensively to awe everyone. Seeing Daniel with no signs of a spell forming, the kid smiled as if victory were in his grasp. Suddenly, he felt a sharp gust of wind push his left leg forward. Although his stance had been grounded, it had been loose due to concentrating on the spell. Losing his balance, he fell back, and when he landed, he was outside the ring. "No. I won't accept this. Why am I outside?" he screamed, anguished at the sudden turn of events. Without a word, the judge pointed at the ring where he had been standing. Behind him was a shining ice shard, rising out of the ground 6 inches high, with the sharp end visible to all. His fall would have driven it deep into his body, killing him easily. The kid looked at Daniel with wide-open eyes, wondering what kind of precise control was needed to manipulate everything in this way. This fighting style was unheard of to all of the students. Only the judges and the dignitaries still had a shocked look on their faces, as if seeing a legend in human flesh. "He is on the path of the paragon." "A pity," said the king, speaking for the first time since coming to the assessment. The court mage beside him nodded, gazing at Daniel's back and pondering over something. The spars continued, with the rest of the students opting to not try what Daniel had just done. The previous student's expression when he had done so and failed was still fresh on their minds. Meanwhile, Daniel walked to a location a bit away from the rest of the students who were waiting for their matches. He still had quite a bit of time before his next match, and he planned to sit down at a nearby tree and wait for his turn. Just as he was about to seat himself, the court mage stepped out of the air in front of him. "Daniel, come with me. The king wants to see you," he said, before tapping his shoulder and making him vanish. They reappeared on the podium, making the spectators and the dignitaries wonder what a student was doing there. But, noticing that it was Daniel, they could only think that the king had taken special notice of his talents and had summoned him to award him. Daniel, on the other hand, was trying hard to control the anger that was threatening to overwhelm him. Although the man in front of him had not been directly responsible for what had happened to his family, he still held equal blame for letting such a thing happen. The king, who had been watching the matches till now, turned his head to see the kid who was now on the stage. The feeling of anger was replaced by one of fear as the king's gaze focused on him. He felt as if he was being stared at by a primordial predator which could kill him with a casual swipe of its hand. ****. Host is under the effect of secret technique weighty gaze. As the host is directly experiencing the affects, Pam too can develop the technique if host maintains contact with the technique for 10 seconds, came the voice from the system. Throughout the year, the system had always been developing spells if he observed them multiple times. For the first time, he could develop a technique by simply being affected by it. Also, it was a technique used by the king himself, so Daniel thought that it must be quite valuable. He decided to hold on no matter what. The court mage had a disapproving look on his face seeing what the king was doing. Daniel, on the other hand, had an expression of resolution as if to say, "Throw whatever you can at me, I can take it." As the seconds ticked by, Daniel felt more and more like he was being crushed by an enormous boulder from above. He knew that all he had to do was kneel, and the pressure would go. Yet, he held on. Although the pain hounded him, making him bleed from his nostrils at the 7th second, he still held on, remembering all the suffering and all the pain. Pain from the hunger when they had nothing to eat. Pain when he saw his father limping around. Pain when he heard his mother crying from the other room, scared that they would have to starve the next day. No matter what, he did not want to give up. The court mage's expression turned uglier and uglier, seeing Daniel's worsening condition. Just as he was about to speak out and try to stop the king, Daniel collapsed onto the ground, kneeling with both his legs bent. "Secret technique weighty gaze ready for development," came the sweet voice of the system, making him smile although he was kneeling on the ground. He had endured, and he felt joy in this small personal victory that no one else would know about. The king shrugged as if it was Daniel's fault that he had not knelt earlier. In a cold voice, he said, "You chose the path of a paragon. Kellier will explain to you why you will fail if you do not give up now. I have had my eye on you ever since you opposed my son at the testing area. You think you are so special just because you have pseudo-legendary potential? Laravel is the least talented of my sons and he needs some tempering, so I sent him to the academy. Of the others, for possess pseudo-legendary potential, and my eldest son, the future king, was blessed by the heavens with crimson-level comprehension. Even if you somehow advance to have crimson comprehension yourself, you can never hold a candle to someone like him who trained for years already possessing such legendary potential. Take my suggestion. Swear a magic oath that you will forever be a vassal of the royal family of Lonthaner, dedicated to following our orders till the end of your life. Your father will be reinstated in the army and you will be showered with riches. I will let you enter the legendary batch and obtain the best resources and teachers without any limit. Choose not to, and nothing will change. Remember, you are just an ant that I can crush under my boot whenever I wish. You can never amount to anything that will threaten my kingdom. Concede your match against Laravel and I will take it as your acceptance. Daniel kept his head down, although he was bristling with anger at the king's words. Now was not the time or place to lash out. His time would come. He would wait, like the tiger that eyes the lone deer, to pounce with all its strength when the time was right. Only, he was still a rabbit, and he had to become that tiger first. Kellier, take him away, the king said, before turning back his attention to the matches. With another tap, Daniel and the court mage were back at the tree. The hair on Daniel's hand stood up straight as he felt the air crackling with energy around him. Looking around, he saw a sight that he would never be able to forget. The court mage stood with his head lowered, while balls of fire, lightning, ice and water constantly blinked in and out of existence near him. Even a small tornado started forming on the ground, making Daniel get up and move back. An expression of utter fury was on his face. Yet, he seemed to be struggling to control himself. After a few seconds, his expression returned to normal, although the signs of the anger were still there. He goes too far. I am sorry, Daniel. I don't know what the previous king was thinking when he gave the throne to this man who is so obsessed with his bloodline. I repeatedly advised him to punish his sons and attract you to the kingdom's side. He does not care. He is blinded by his eldest son's potential, and does not care about anything else but growing his own power and extending his life. Daniel, I know you. I have inquired about you, and I know that you will not concede. The only good thing is that his attention is short. When you do not concede, he will be angry at you, but he cannot act against you as there are too many people watching. Later, he will be busy in his own pursuit of power, so you will be fine. Only, you will not be able to enter the legendary batch. I will do everything in my power to help you. First, let me tell you about the Paragon's path. A Paragon is one who has all elements at his beck and call. Depending on the situation, he can control anything and everything to obtain victory even against opponents many levels above him. The problem is that all those who have started on the path of a Paragon without possessing gold comprehension have failed. The maximum level they could cultivate to was Human Mage 6, before running out of lifespan and dying. A mage advances in level by slowly increasing the number of elementary particles he can connect with, particle by particle, thus tempering his magic and inducing it to transform. There are certain thresholds which indicate when the transformation will occur. This number can only increase with time, and a Paragon splits his time between too many particles. Thus, without gold potential, it is impossible to advance quickly enough to enter the next level and obtain more power. The strongest Paragon from Lonthaner who reached the level of Human Mage 6, could defeat a Human Mage 8 in combat. Born with crimson potential, he could turn the tide of a war single-handedly. Yet, he died in a century while his peer with the same potential still lives to this day. All because he chose a single focus. And that man is my master. Daniel, choose your own path. You just need to know that if you choose to walk the path of a Paragon, you must be willing to accept that you might burn brighter than everyone, but when you pass away, they might still be alive. You must choose between living longer and living stronger. Good luck with the remaining spars, although I expect they won't be much of a problem. I'll come meet you later, once the spars are done. Daniel simply nodded, struggling to get up and lean against the tree. His body felt tired, as if he really had been crushed by that boulder above him before. Hearing his name being called, he took a deep breath and ran towards the sparring area. The next 3 matches moved smoothly, with 2 directly conceding and the other trying to run towards Daniel almost like the puppet. And like the puppet, his face became planted in the ground soon after. That kid was even part of the nobility, so Daniel wondered just what his objective had been. Regardless, the final fight soon approached. Either through coincidence or luck, Laravel and Daniel hadn't faced each other yet. Now, they would finally fight in the finals. The winner was supposed to be awarded a gift by the king himself to encourage mages in training, but Daniel honestly didn't even want any gift from the arrogant king. The best gift he could give was the throne, but that, Daniel would have to take himself. Soon, the two of them stood opposite each other, while the crowd watched with bated breath. So far, only Daniel's matches had had the most cheers, because the rest seemed relatively quite boring. Laravel stood there, smiling at Daniel while a lightning bolt like the one that had hit the puppet formed in front of him. Daniel shrugged and connected with the air elementary particles near Laravel's legs, aiming to defeat him in the same way he had defeated the others. It would be fitting to show that he was nothing special. Yet, it seemed that the prince had already thought of this. Unnoticed, his feet had been buried in the ground and he stood firmly in his place. Although Daniel tried twice, he didn't even budge. Of course, Daniel had a lot of other tricks up his sleeve, but he wondered whether to show them here, in front of so many people. A dagger hidden was much more effective than one out in the open, after all. Remembering the king's words, a burst of anger inundated Daniel. No. He did not want to lose. Making his decision, Daniel started running toward Laravel. As he did so, a wide, cunning smile appeared on Laravel's face, which he hastily tried to control. Sensing something was amiss, Daniel suddenly jumped to the side hearing the system's message. Explosion trinket activated in host's vicinity. Boom. An explosion rocked the sparring ground, with plumes of dust rising into the air. The spectators were thoroughly shocked, craning their necks to see the aftermath. Was the prince so powerful as to cause such an explosion? They wondered. Busy with trying to control his smile, Laravel hadn't managed to notice Daniel jumping away at the last moment. Still, he kept forming his thunderbolt, just in case his opponent was unharmed. He did not want to take any chances in such an important match, where he could impress his father with his performance. As the dust slowly faded, a hole in the ground 2 feet wide and 5 feet deep started to become visible. It just so happened to be at the exact spot that the kid from before had fallen down. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, as if he had become ash from the explosion. Suddenly, Laravel started to shake where he stood as if he were being electrocuted. Struggling to turn around, he was shocked to see a smirking Daniel behind him, putting a hand on his back and sending waves of electricity and fire into him. The judge immediately teleported Laravel out, seeing this scene. Only, the damage had already been done. He looked pathetic, with hair half standing up and clothes almost completely burnt. Daniel had used the combination of electricity and fire to do the most damage. Laravel now had fear on his face, gazing at Daniel standing on the ground, unharmed. He had actually teleported behind him. A human mage zero who could teleport. Such a thing was simply unheard of. The crowd and the dignitaries had their jaws wide open after seeing Daniel appear out of thin air behind Laravel and hitting him with a tiny ball of lightning and fire. It was truly as the legend stated. A paragon stood unmatched, even in front of those above his level. The rest of the students needed time to even form a small fireball, and Daniel was already capable of teleporting behind an opponent and hitting them with such a destructive attack. The disparity was simply too much. The rest of the candidates felt awkward, not knowing where to look as they tried not to compare themselves with this monster. Daniel wins, came the announcement, prompting the crowd to stand up simultaneously and start cheering. It seemed that there would be no comment on the trinket. Either the judge had not noticed it, or had simply chosen to ignore it. Daniel! 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 A chant started, which grew louder and louder with time. The king, who had an ugly and disapproving expression seeing Laravel being teleported out of the match, had vanished instantly with the court mage after giving Daniel a pensive look. Feeling the showers of praises raining down on him, Daniel felt that it had all been worth it. The days and days of time spent in solitude perfecting each individual spell, the pain from falling down repeatedly when practicing short-range teleportation, the constant suffering from repeatedly having his Madrat stimulated and developed throughout the year, they had all led up to this moment. In the crowd, he could see Elenev, jumping with joy seeing Daniel's excellent performance. All this time, he had always been constantly visiting, encouraging Daniel and occasionally even helping with practice. He could see his parents crying tears of joy as they saw their son being applauded by so many people. They felt like they were drowning in pride, and thanked the heavens for gifting them with such an incredible son. Even Faxel, who was often stoic, was smiling and clapping as hard as he could. He was his only friend who had stood by him, despite the spoiled brat's warnings. Although the message that he heard from the system startled him, it was simply the icing on the cake, making him smile even broader as he spread his arms, welcoming all of the praise and applause. Achievement, People's Admiration 1 obtained. People's Admiration 1, by showing your capabilities at the first-year assessment in the National Magic Academy of Lonthaner, you have won the People's Admiration and your name will now be remembered by them and spread to many. Congratulations on becoming a figure that will be talked about by numerous people, aiding your journey to becoming a world dominator. 500 EXP awarded. 3 achievements have been obtained. Secret conditions met. System store has been opened in advance for host perusal. The judges were puzzled seeing the king leave. He was supposed to stay and decide the gifts for the top-ranked mages, based on their performance. Without any other choice, they communicated with the Academy Council behind the throne and simply announced that the gifts would be handed out later. The crowd soon dispersed, allowing Daniel to go meet his friends and family. Elenev patted his head as soon as he came, saying, "Well done, kiddo. I knew you would shine. Damn that king. I knew he was ruthless, but to use a technique to make you kneel? That's something." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but moved away after noticing that Maria was running towards Daniel with arms stretched wide open. She hugged him tight, crying uncontrollably. She couldn't even speak, so Daniel just patted her back, feeling happy seeing the tears of joy. His father was also standing just a few steps away, with a wide smile and clear eyes, clearer than Daniel had seen in many years. It seemed that seeing his achievement had started to wash away the years of suffering and regret that both his parents had borne. Faxel also simply hugged him after his mother. But in his expression, Daniel saw both the happiness for his achievement and a longing to stand equal to him. Faxel was such a person he spoke little, but felt quite a lot. Seeing Daniel being applauded by so many people had lit a fire in him. Everyone was invited to the villa given to Daniel, where the Anavern family threw a huge party. Many people from the slums also made their way over on Robert's invitation. Even Felix was invited, and he arrived bringing 2 bottles of red wine. As soon as he arrived, Robert teased him saying that he had brought 2 bottles, despite being so stingy. This was the first time Daniel saw his father tease anybody. As the night progressed, people passed out one by one as the strong wine coursed through their bodies. Daniel didn't drink, but he had fun watching everyone's drunken interactions. He was actually just waiting to get to bed himself and explore the system store. Soon, it was just him and Felix. Felix had congratulated him when he had first entered the house, but he hadn't said a word to Daniel since. Now, he came and sat beside him on a stool, nursing the bottle of wine he had brought in his hands. Elenev told me what happened during the assessment, he said, before letting out a deep sigh and taking a swig from the bottle. My father told me about a time when the king treated commoners and the royal family fairly. The kingdom flourished, and that was when we expanded our kingdom to what it is now. Men and women worked together, putting everything aside, to build the great walls that now protect this kingdom. But, it was all ruined when that king's brother, the father of our present king, betrayed him. He took the throne and built the walls between the inner and outer city. He started the mindset that the nobility were above the commoners. Something needs to change, he said, before slumping down on the table in front of him and going to sleep. This was the first time Daniel was hearing about a time when there were no inner and outer cities. He was fascinated by such a king who could make such great things happen. Indeed, something had to change, before standing up and going to bed. Open system store, he commanded as soon as he closed the door to his room. System store is accessed best with the HUD-1 tool. Would host like to equip the tool? Asked the system. As soon as Daniel said yes, a bookcase appeared in front of him. Thick, hardbound books adorned the shelves in many colors, making Daniel feel as if he were back in his room on Earth. This exact bookcase had been purchased by him with his savings, as he had seen it in a store and loved it at first sight. Sadly, he had not managed to fill the shelves before having to sell it off due to the dire circumstances. One of his regrets was not seeing that case filled with all of his favorite books. Now, seeing that same bookcase here, Daniel was shocked. Optimum display configuration chosen from host's memory. Available EXP, 1150. Please browse and select the tool that you would like to purchase, came the system's voice, making him snap out of his reverie. Daniel got up and walked to the case. He hesitantly raised his hand to take out a book, only to find that his suspicion of everything being virtual was false. The book that he touched felt real, with the leather of the binding rubbing against his fingers. Taking it out, he felt the heft of the book before opening the page to find. Parallel Processing 1 allows host to use 2 techniques at once. Cost, 1000 EXP. The rest of the book was made up of complex formulae and drawings that made no sense to Daniel. What struck him was the possibility of developing both his body and Madrid at the same time. In the academy, he had chosen to focus on his magic route exclusively after seeing the incredible effects that the first 2 months had had on his psyche. But, he had never forgotten his base, which was his body. He frequently practiced the hidden fist and exercised his body daily so as not to forget everything he had learned in the 3-month hell training. Daniel was tempted to outright buy this tool, because it said techniques. This meant that he could potentially utilize 2 spells at the same time. Right now, he needed to first use one then the other, which took some time. Also, the effects couldn't combine. If fire and lightning really had combined in his strike against Laravel, the kid would have died for sure. Daniel had only used the fireball spell followed by the lightning bolt. Exercising some self-restraint, Daniel put the book back. As he did so, he noticed that some books had bright colors whereas others were black. He tried pulling out a black one, but it did not budge. On asking the system, the reply that he got was, "The black books are special tools. Secret conditions must be met in order to unlock them." The wide smile was wiped off of Daniel's face, who had been feeling happy that he had unlocked everything. Shrugging, he started checking the other books. Some tools, like Faction Control 1, obtained detailed statistics of 10 faction members. Cost, 5 faction points, were useless to him right now as he had not built a faction yet, although he planned to begin building one soon. Others were too costly, like PAM 3, unlocks predictive capabilities. Allows host to guess the technique a certain time before the technique is used. Also has other functions. Cost, 2000 EXP. Such tools were way out of reach from him right now. Finally, with his present points, Daniel had to choose between 2 tools. Parallel Processing 1, allows host to use 2 techniques at once. Cost, 1000 EXP, and Disguise 1, allows host to change face structure and body size. Increase in size will result in decrease in power. Duration, 24 hours. Cost, 1000 EXP. Lonthaner Outer City, West Side. In a dark alley, a thin man wearing gray clothes could be seen walking slowly, observing door after door. He finally stopped at a door marked with a fading 3-headed cobra. On knocking, a voice was heard from inside which asked, "Where does the sun set?" "The sun sets on the bodies of those who gave up their lives for a better Lonthaner," answered the man in a rasping voice. The door opened, but as the man walked through, a sack was suddenly put on his head. Without resisting, he allowed himself to be led forward through a series of tunnels before finally arriving at a room that seemed to be situated underground. There were only a table and 2 chairs in this room. The man was seated down on one and the sack was removed, revealing a gaunt face with sunken eyes. This man was Daniel. Although buying the parallel processing tool had been very tempting, he had decided on buying the disguise tool. This was because his plan was to use the disguise as a means to set up a faction for himself. As the system itself had told him, the best awards would be received from doing things which aided the journey towards world domination. Now, he had the power of a paragon to defend himself. Thus, he had decided that it was finally time. If he succeeded, there would be many more points soon enough, which he could use to buy whichever tool he wanted. As soon as he had chosen the tool, the system had finally given him a mission. After going for a year without missions, this voice actually sounded quite sweet in his ears. Ding asterisk. New mission, investigate the secret society which contracted the thieves to rob the map to the natural energized training chamber. Mission EXP award, 200 EXP. Mission description, on analysis of data collected from host's surroundings, the system has concluded that there is a possibility that the society can help in the host's overall quest. Would you like to accept the mission? Of course, Daniel had accepted in a heartbeat. He was confident in his power to defeat even a human 3 fighter, and he even had the disguise tool. Also, he only had to investigate the society, and he could leave in case there was danger using the short-range teleportation technique. On accepting, Daniel had been given the location of the entrance and the passphrase, which had been recorded in the thief's diary. As the academy had just announced a 5-day break after which the awards would be given, he decided that now was the perfect time to pursue the mission. This led him to his present situation. While he waited for someone to show up, Daniel wondered if he had been overconfident. He could not teleport directly outside as his teleportation only had a maximum range of a few feet from his location. And teleporting into something solid meant certain death. As the minutes ticked by, Daniel focused on keeping his expression neutral. It had taken some time to get used to the new body. When he first used the tool, his whole body had felt as if something was peeling his skin off. Daniel could only roll on the ground, struggling not to shout while enduring the excruciating pain. Afterwards, even walking had been difficult. It was only after quite some time of crawling that he finally became comfortable with his longer legs and body. Also, he felt that his power had been halved. Sure enough, each and every technique only resulted in half the power compared to his usual state. Even the teleportation distance had been halved. Still feeling that it would be enough for escape and excited about finally starting to build his own faction, Daniel had decided to go. Now, it was too late for regrets. After roughly a half hour, a man finally entered through the door in front of him. With wrinkled skin and a hunched back, the man looked ancient. "What is your purpose for seeking the secret society?" he asked in a hoarse voice after taking a seat in front of Daniel. "I am a skilled mage and I would like to receive contracts from the society." Daniel had decided on this story. With the information he had, the society was like a place where illegal activities could be commissioned for a price. He had even made up a story for how he got the passphrase, but the man seemed to be uninterested in that. Hearing his answer, the man smiled slightly before knocking on the table. On both sides of the room, numerous holes opened up from which arrows which shined as if coated with something were shot out. There was no time to even think about dodging. Daniel could only close his eyes, bracing in fear, before he realized that there had been no impact. The arrows floated in the air on both sides of his head. Meanwhile, a file had appeared in front of the old man. Daniel Anavrin. Pseudo-legendary potential, chose the path of a paragon. Father thrown out of the military. Suspected backing of human mage 8 based on disguise spell used, he read out idly opening the file. Daniel was shocked. How did these people know everything about him? "We have had our eye on you ever since the incident at the library. Even now, our lookout alerted us that a man exited the Anavrin house. The giveaway was that he was wearing the clothes of Daniel Anavrin, but they looked torn, as if they had been stretched. The man went back in the house and exited again, this time wearing gray clothes. It's all here. Kid, take my advice. Just focus on growing in power. When the time is right, we will contact you ourselves. Of course, we will always have an eye on you," he said, before Daniel felt a sharp blow from behind knock him out. The last thing he heard before his consciousness faded was, "My apologies to the mage behind you for the rough handling." An unknown amount of time later, Daniel woke up holding his head, which hurt like someone had dropped a boulder on it. He seemed to have been unceremoniously thrown out of the door. Picking himself up, he walked back home, cursing at the society. Yet, he couldn't help but look around to see where the person who was apparently observing him was hiding. He had to be careful from now on. The only consolation was that the system had at least decided that he had done enough. Mission accomplished. Society details have been extracted from host's surroundings. 200 EXP awarded. The secret society that host has come into contact with is known as the Tricobra Society. It is a society that establishes itself in any kingdom across the world where a section of the populace is oppressed. They operate in 3 stages. First stage, open a contact point where the society collects information about all the notable people in a city. Second stage, using these people as the manpower, the society becomes a place where people can give and take contracts for illegal activities. Third stage, unknown. To answer host's unspoken query, the sack on host's head was designed to prevent any sound from entering, but the system was able to gather this information by analyzing the vibrations in the air felt by the host's skin. This is typically the way the system collects information from host's surroundings. After host lost consciousness, a sentence spoken by the person whom host was in contact with has also been recorded. "Would you like to hear it?" asked the system. Daniel had always suspected that the system eavesdropped on his thoughts. He had been wondering just how the system collected information from the surroundings, and that question had been answered now. Besides that, the information about the Tricobra Society was very troubling. From the first 2 stages, it became clear that they had some sort of motive in the city. Sadly, the third stage wasn't known. Daniel couldn't even decide if their motives were sinister or not with the limited information that he had right now. "Yes," he said, hoping that it was something important that he could use. The voice of the old man in the room was heard again in Daniel's ears. "If it weren't for the mage backing you, I wouldn't hesitate to keep you here. Count your lucky stars that we cannot move against any powerful personages right now." Throw him out, the voice said, making Daniel grind his teeth. Keep him there? It seemed that the mishap with the clothes had actually ended up helping him. Yet, Daniel still didn't know exactly what they wanted with the kingdom of Lonthaner. Regardless, he decided to pay more attention from now on and not let such a stupid action occur again. Daniel had in fact not been in full control of the sensations from his body when he had teleported out, and it was that small lapse of attention that had alerted the society about his identity. System, can you find out who is the one following me? He asked, hoping that he could somehow identify and evade the person who was apparently keeping an eye on him. He did not like the feeling of being followed at all. He had in fact been looking around in every direction since he had left the alley, but there was no sign of anyone in his vicinity. Negative. Please buy the Surveillance Tool 1 in the System store. Surveillance Tool 1 allows the system to monitor the surroundings of the host up to a radius of 100 feet. Cost, 1500 EXP. Damn EXP again, thought Daniel, but he wasn't very worried. He had already decided on a plan last night to gain achievements and harvest tons of EXP. As soon as he got to his house, Daniel looked around once again before teleporting into his room. There were still a few hours before morning, so he lay down on the bed and instantly fell asleep after deactivating the disguise. A rustling sound woke him up from the dream he had been having of stepping on the arrogant king's face. Drowsily looking around, he noticed a familiar man with a puzzled expression on his face looking at Daniel's clothes which had torn due to him using the disguise tool. His first reaction was fear, before he recognized that it was Kellier. Wait, he thought, finally realizing that this was his bedroom. What the hell was the court mage doing in his bedroom in the wee hours of the morning? Ah. I see you are up. I was just looking at your clothes, because they reminded me of a very difficult spell that only 8th grade human mages are able to cast. Forget it, it just looked familiar, he said, before quickly letting go of the clothes he had been examining in his hands. With a slightly embarrassed look on his face, he continued without giving Daniel a chance to speak. Please don't mind that I appeared here in your room. The Grand Court Mage is greeting some friends, and I wanted to use this opportunity to say something to you. For years, I have been waiting for someone who has the talent and zeal to become a leader of the people. Since the incident at the library where you brought the actions of the despicable clerk and guard to light, thereby bringing justice to countless commoners, I have been watching you. I even decided to groom you secretly in case you turned out to have at least crimson-level potential. Kellier's expression had been turning more and more serious with each word. Now, Daniel felt a solemnness in his tone as he continued, asking, "Tell me the truth, Daniel. I asked my master about the time needed for someone training as a paragon to reach your level, and he said that it was impossible that you only have pseudo-legendary potential. Did you hide your potential during the test? And if you did, will you choose to trust me and tell me the truth now? It is your choice to make," he said, before folding his hands and looking expectantly at Daniel. Kellier's impassioned speech had caused a roller coaster of emotions inside Daniel. First, he had been scared that Kellier would recognize that they were the effects of the disguise tool. Then, he felt indignation that not one, but two parties had had an eye on him. Finally, he felt happy as he had finally found an ally he could trust. His instinct told him strongly that the man in front of him would never betray him. As soon as he made the decision in his mind, the system spoke. He fought to control the smile that was spreading to both ends of his face as he had found out already that his judgment was right. Achievement, First Steadfast Ally unlocked. 2000 EXP awarded. First Steadfast Ally, the Court Mage of the Kingdom of Lonthaner, Kellier, has been observing you since you were cheered by the people for bringing justice to many. He saw the persistence and determination in you when you trained in the way of the Paragon and when you chose to bleed first rather than kneel in front of the king. Although he still has his doubts about whether you can be the leader that he has been looking for, he will be your ally in the struggles to come. It is now your choice to decide how close of an ally you want him to be. Hearing this, Daniel did not dally anymore. Without a word, he stood up and spread his arms. Fire, water, lightning, ice, earth, wind and space. Elementary particles of different types danced around him one by one as he connected with each in quick succession. To Kellier, who was watching, it was as if a brilliant kaleidoscope had come into existence in front of him. With his elementary sight, he could see the speed and ease with which Daniel controlled each element. This is not possible with just crimson potential, he thought, as waves and waves of shock and awe washed over him. Tears of joy streamed down his face, as he realized that he had finally found the one he was looking for all these years. When Daniel stopped the display, Kellier staggered to a chair nearby and sat down clumsily. He seemed to be unable to control his emotions as he let the tears flow. Daniel let the man let it all out. In his expression, he could see years and years of bottling up grievances and regrets. The sheer amount of pain reflected in that expression made his heart lurch, and he felt happy that he had chosen to trust this man. After a few minutes, Kellier finally controlled himself and looked up at Daniel with a smile on his face. "I apologize for the outburst of emotions. It's just that. I was a commoner myself, before my master saw the potential in me and trained me to be the next court mage. At that time, the king was not this bloodline-obsessed man. I was trained while being extolled the values of fair treatment and kindness. Only a few years after I became court mage, the kind king was betrayed and the throne was usurped. I had already made a magical vow to follow the king's orders, because that was mandatory when one is selected to be trained as a court mage. Of course, then, it was stated that the king would release the court mage from his vow when a successor was trained." Anger and frustration morphed his face as he continued, recalling all of the memories that he had kept locked away. "I could only watch when the walls were built, separating the nobility and the commoners. I could only watch as innocent men, women, and children fell prey to the sons and daughters of the king. I could only watch when dutiful soldiers who were ready to give their life for the kingdom were ashamed and kicked out mercilessly because they hurt a noble's ego. I could only keep watching and wish I could gouge my eyes out." He stood up from the chair and clasped Daniel's shoulders, as the tears vanished from his face and were replaced by a triumphant smile. "Finally, I have found the one I have been waiting for. And with gold comprehension to boot. The heavens have finally blessed my kingdom with some good luck. Tell me, what do you need in the academy? I'll make sure it's awarded to you as the gift for winning the assessment." Daniel also felt happy as he saw his ally already show his value. "Most importantly, I need full access to the library. And I need access to the lower grades in the academy. And lastly, I want to choose a master who will let me do whatever I want," he said, listing the wishes that he had long decided upon. Masters were typically chosen in the second year of the academy, after one showed their talent in the first-year assessment. Although everyone had the same classes in the first year, from the second year they would choose a focus and a master to study that focus with. The student's schedule would be decided by the master, and they had no say in the matter unless they were dissatisfied with the teaching and chose to change their master. Masters were paid handsomely for each student successfully trained, and thus reputation was most important to them as this would mean that they could have many students under their wing. "It's decided then. You will be given full, unrestricted access to the whole academy except for the secret section of the library which even I can't access. Only the king and the grand court mage, who exists hidden from everyone's knowledge, can access whatever is placed inside there. As for the master, there is someone I trained for a brief time who is currently a teacher at the academy. I don't know how if we can trust him fully, but I will instruct him to let you do whatever you want." He sighed as he spoke of this man. He was once one of the geniuses in the academy, shining brighter than anyone else. But, he chose to go against the king and was punished in the most painful way possible. Now, he passes his days as if waiting for death. His story is not mine to tell though, so I will stop here. Daniel nodded while he rejoiced inside. Unrestricted access to the academy. This was exactly what he had been seeking for so long. "I will visit again when the grand court mage diverts his gaze. Be careful in whatever you do, and—" Kellier's body flickered as his voice stopped midway. Puzzled, Daniel stretched out his arm to find that he was already gone and that there was only an after-image left. It seemed that the grand court mage must have been done entertaining his friends. Taking a deep breath, Daniel sat back down on his bed and reflected on everything that Kellier had said. There was only one question that he had wanted to ask, whether this grand court mage could see everything he did. "System, how does their surveillance work? The court mage saved me from the spy from Axeler, but he didn't see me when I used the disguise tool. Was I just lucky?" he asked, hoping that he could find an answer. Negative. For wide-area surveillance, mages use a spell which notifies them whenever abnormal magic fluctuations occur in the area. To stop too many notifications from inundating the mage's mind, only instances where the level of the magic used far exceeds the level of the surrounding individuals are brought to the mage's attention. Also, high-level mages can be tracked using the fluctuations sent out naturally by their magrat. It is possible that this is what the court mage was referring to, as this requires active concentration from whoever is casting the spell. Daniel heaved a sigh of relief after hearing this. Now, he only needed to worry about the Tricobra Society. But first, his hands itched as he knew that he had a ton of EXP waiting to be used. On opening the system store, he rushed to the book with Parallel Processing 1 and instantly bought it. After doing so, he immediately closed the store because he did not want to peruse leisurely and become tempted to buy some other tool. He wanted to save the points for a rainy day. There was no way he would ever take another loan, especially considering the black-hearted interest rate. Purchase made and tool ready to deploy. Thank you for shopping with the system. Remaining EXP, 1350. Excited, he immediately deployed the tool and cast both the fireball spell and the lightning spell at the same time. Typically, a mage needed to connect with the particles using their Madrid and pull and push them to get the result they wished for. As for Daniel, the year of using the Madrid development technique won by the system allowed him to develop his Madrid to gold comprehension. This meant that he could directly control the particles with a thought. Although the number of particles he could control was limited, the speed was astonishing. What others with red comprehension needed a minute or more to do, he could do in a second. And this applied to all particles, not just a specific type like others focused on. Of course, he could also command the system to use a technique, but he had found that this took longer than when he did it himself. He could cast simpler spells like fire, earth, wind, and ice instantly, but spells like lightning and space needed the system's intervention to be cast quickly and accurately. Although he could also cast them, he just needed a little more time due to the inherent complexity. This could be shortened with more practice. A tiny fireball the size of a marble appeared on the palm of his hand as he commanded the system to use the fireball technique after also communicating the size. Then, he used the tool to cast a tiny lightning bolt at the same spot. Boom! An explosion woke everyone in the house, making them wonder what had happened. As Daniel's parents rushed up to his room after seeing that there was smoke coming from above, they saw a kid blackened with soot coughing as he tried to put out the fire in his hair. In a classroom with over 1,000 students in the National Magic Academy of Lonthaner, a man with a long white beard was hunched over a table on which a sword had been placed. His hands hovered over the blade of the sword while his eyes were closed, muttering something under his breath. Suddenly, the blade shrunk into a coin which seemed to have been heated red-hot. As the man stopped muttering, the red-hot coin slowly became normal. Taking the coin in his hand, he squeezed it in his palm, making a sword appear out of thin air. The crowd cheered as they witnessed this sight. Many looked on with envy as he pocketed the coin and thanked the man standing next to him before addressing the crowd. Thank you for your applause. Like I was saying, it takes years and years of patience and dedication to become an enchanter. Just like mages, enchanters also have grades from 1 to 9. But, the highest enchanter in our kingdom is only a grade 2 enchanter. This is because although the man has reached the level of a 7th grade exalted human mage, his skill in enchantment has not increased enough to cross the threshold to become a grade 3 enchanter. You are too polite, my friend. You are the top enchanter in the kingdom. There is no reason to shortchange yourself, said the man who had been standing to the side while the demonstration had been taking place. The crowd went wild as they realized that the man in front of them was actually the only grade 2 enchanter in the kingdom, capable of making trinkets that all eminent human mages and fighters could use. The man simply smiled and moved to the side after bowing to the crowd who were cheering without a stop. The other man took over the podium in front and said, "That concludes the demonstration. 2nd grade enchanter Sellax's personal shop will open in the marketplace in 3 days. If you want to buy trinkets straight from this master's hands, do rush over to the shop. Everyone is dismissed." The two on the stage vanished as the crowd began discussing among themselves. My father gave me a 100 gold lands when I told him Master Sellax himself is opening his shop. He told me to buy whatever trinkets I wanted. I've been saving up to buy the wallet trinket for so long, but I don't have enough money yet. When will I be able to carry everything I want using just a small pouch? Such discussions could be heard everywhere while a kid with very short brown hair stared pensively at the spot where the two had vanished. This was Daniel. After putting out the fire in his hair with a water sphere, he had vowed to never try spell combinations again without proper precautions. His hair, which had been thoroughly burned by the fire, had had to be mowed into its present condition. Maria had struggled to control her laugh as she saw Daniel grumbling while she cut his hair to get rid of the burned parts. Also, the system had alerted him that someone had turned their gaze towards him when he made the ball of thunder fire. Daniel did not know if it was the court mage or the grand court mage, but he could not take any risks. Practicing combination spells was officially off the agenda for him presently. The 5 days were spent with his family and friends, with Elenev and Faxel constantly dropping by and sparring with him. Faxel was putting more and more focus than ever on improving, both as a mage and as a fighter. Such a training was typically undertaken by those who would act as vanguards for armies. Having both a strong body and a solid foundation in magic, they had the ability to fit into multiple roles both for attack and defense. The only drawback was that although the position that a pure mage or fighter could fill was fixed, they were almost always more powerful than one who trained in the path of a vanguard. Still, there were special roles in an army that only a vanguard could fill. Although Daniel had asked the reason, Faxel never told him why he had chosen to take this path. The main advantage of this path was that vanguards had no glaring weaknesses, unlike someone who was purely a mage or a fighter. Fighters were weak in long range and mages were typically weak in short range. Robert and Maria even treated Faxel as a second son because they loved how he always helped them whenever he could. Although he spoke little, the Anavrin family loved him for his steadfast determination to do whatever he chose to the best of his ability. Elenev always loved to spar with Daniel because he was fascinated with the powers of a paragon. He was considered highly talented for his age, having reached the level of a 5th-stage eminent human at the young age of 25. Of course, this was to be expected as he possessed top-grade body potential and his family was anything but poor. In just their first spar, Daniel had defeated him by making him lose his balance and fall to the ground. Although he got up immediately, he admitted defeat after Daniel showed him how fast he could make an ice prick appear in the path of his fall. In subsequent fights, he always stayed on his feet and never gave Daniel the chance to use his spells on him. Even spells that he targeted at the locations where Elenev would step next were dodged because of the sheer speed of reaction of an eminent human. This also enabled Daniel to think of more strategies for offense against fighters. Right now, they were tied 5-5 due to Daniel resorting to cheating by using the system. He made multiple fireballs or ice pricks appear in succession using the parallel processing tool, before giving Elenev no chance to dodge. Of course, he only did this to find out what his max potential was presently. According to the system, the amount of particles he could connect to, which grew slowly with time and prolonged usage of magic, was fast reaching the threshold where he would advance to become a first-grade amateur human mage. This would let him control at least 50% more particles right after the breakthrough due to the unpeeling of the first layer of the pineal gland. He had only a few ether blocks, so he decided not to use them in this short span of time for training his body and Madrut at the same time. He resolved to use the energized training chambers in the academy to parallelly train in both and grow in power quickly. As soon as he got back to the academy though, an announcement was made that an enchanter would display his skills because he was advertising for his new shop in the marketplace. Daniel had rushed to the location as he had always been interested in the art of enchantment. Trinkets were the lifeblood of any kingdom, whether it be luxury trinkets which drove the economy or combat trinkets which armed the soldiers. Enchanters were the people who made the trinkets, sought after by all for their sheer value in making a kingdom grow. A first-grade enchanter could make trinkets for amateur fighters and mages, allowing one to use them until they stepped into the eminent grades. Thereafter, they would have to seek second-grade enchanters for more powerful trinkets which catered to eminent fighters and mages only. Daniel had been hoping that the system could make a technique for enchantment, but there was no response even after the man was done. It seemed that he had to find a way to spectate a few more enchantments. An announcement broke him out of his thoughts, making him chuckle with glee and rush towards the library. The awards for the top 3 in the first-year assessment have been announced. Please check the notice board for more details. The notice board was right outside the library, so the area was packed before Daniel even arrived. The prize for the first-ranked Daniel especially made everyone gawk, but not in envy. The second-ranked Laravel had been awarded a first-grade pyromaniac trinket, which was a special trinket that could aid a mage's connection with fire elementary particles, letting them cast spells faster. Although it did not aid directly in the speed at which a mage developed, it was a great help in combat as long as one was an amateur mage. The third-placed student's award was a defense trinket, specifically a robe which could block punches and kicks from amateur fighters. Both of these awards were only meant as a means to encourage others to do better, but they already cost 300 gold lands and 100 gold lands, respectively. But when one read the award for the first-ranked Daniel, they could only sigh with pity. All he got was unrestricted access to the academy and the right to choose a master. The first could simply be gained with time, because a student unlocked new areas in the academy as they progressed year by year. As for the right to choose a master, any talented student would have masters offering their teaching because a talented student had higher chances of passing out successfully and in a shorter period of time. The faster a student graduated, the more handsomely a master would be paid. Most of the students had been spectators when Daniel had been forced to kneel in front of the king, bleeding. They assumed that this unfair treatment was also because he had opposed the king in some manner. Of course, many assumed that it was because he had beaten Laravel into such a sorry state. Since the incident, Laravel had disappeared from the academy, and many whispered that it was because he could not bear to show his face around. As Daniel neared the library, some people turned around noticing his arrival. Although they still did not dare to talk to him due to the prince's orders, his performance in the assessment had truly astonished them and he now had a place in their hearts. They sighed and shook their heads wistfully before starting to disperse from the notice board. Noticing all the sighs and head shakes, Daniel wondered what the heck was happening before checking the notice board himself. Trinkets. Damn trinkets again. He thought when he saw the awards for the other two students. Although he knew that what he had gotten was much more valuable for him than any trinket, he still couldn't help but feel a little jealous of the shiny coins that turned into magical things or had magical properties. He still treasured the dagger/knife trinket that he had borrowed from Elinav. The others watched on as he also sighed and shook his head. This elicited another round of sighs before they left, cursing the black-hearted king in their minds. Little did they know that Daniel was sighing because he was looking forward to swimming in a lake of trinkets as soon as he developed the technique to learn them by observing an enchanter. The others would have simply puked blood on seeing this image in Daniel's mind. Suddenly, he heard a yell from inside the library before somebody skidded to a stop near his feet. It was Faxel. His snub-nosed face was pallid, with blood leaking from his mouth as he gasped for breath. A rage bubbled up inside Daniel seeing his friend in such a dire state. He immediately turned around to see who had the gall to hurt him. 3 students wearing the robes of nobility walked out, with panic evident on their faces as they saw the enraged Daniel glaring at them. The trio were made up of 2 boys and a girl, who stood in the center and seemed to be leading them. The girl wore the most luxurious clothes, with the royal crest shining on the hem of her velvet dress. The other 2 13-year-olds were dressed the same, and they even seemed to be twins. "Weren't you at the classroom?" the girl said before immediately closing her mouth as if she had said something she shouldn't. Daniel had indeed rushed over on hearing the announcement. Everything clicked into place as he heard her say these words. Over the past year, there had been many instances when Faxel had been injured, limping into bed with bandaged arms or legs. When Daniel asked, he had simply told him that it was because of some sparring practice in the woods. Now that he thought about it, all the days that Faxel had become hurt were days he was either in the woods or in the library. Completely absorbed in his schedule, he had not noticed the little clues such as a noble always near him wherever he was or even sometimes, kids running right after they saw him coming. He hit his own head as he realized how foolish he had been. Although spars were forbidden in the first year, it did not mean that someone could discreetly attack another student. For the nobility, it seemed that any rules could be bent. Daniel had many questions. For instance, why had he not been attacked? Why had Faxel not told him about the altercations? Why had he not complained to the council? All of them were irrelevant at this moment. His friend was in his arms, bleeding. He had endured countless amounts of pain, suffering, and blood all without even telling him a word. And he was definitely the reason for everything. He had been foolish to think that the prince wouldn't enforce his rule to stay away from Daniel. Why, he simply asked, as the trio in front of him shook in their shoes. They wanted to move, but at some point of time, 3 ice pricks had appeared in front of their throats. Even a tiny movement would result in their deaths. "It was my choice to be your friend. It was my responsibility to take care of them," he said in a hoarse voice, before passing out in his arms. The trio shrieked as the ice pricks moved closer to their throats, drawing tiny lines of blood. Daniel bent and checked Faxel's pulse. Seeing that it was fine, he wiped his forehead that had beaded with sweat. He did not even know that he had such a friend who could endure any amount of pain just because he had made the choice to defy the prince for him. They never spent time joking around. They never talked about themselves, laying their hearts out. Yet, they had grown close enough with time to understand the other without a need for words. Such a friend was truly hard to come by. Daniel picked up Faxel gingerly and started walking towards the infirmary, while the ice pricks floating in front of the trio faded into the air. The three heaved a sigh of relief, but a strong voice that echoed in their ears birthed a fear in them that would give them nightmares. This is not over. Daniel walked at a medium pace, constantly checking Faxel's pulse as he tried to control his emotions. All he needed was a single thought and he could have killed those three at the spot. But, he could not do so unless he was confident in his power to evade the king. Now was still not the time, but Daniel resolved not to let go of this matter so easily. They could bend the rules? Well then so could he, and without a trace at that. He had had no friends back on Earth, and the limited social interaction of both of his lives made it so that his social skills were not very strong. Still, he was improving by leaps and bounds every day with constant exposure to his friends and family. Now, he knew how much of a blunder he had made by not noticing the signs. Daniel etched this into his heart, and he would make sure it wouldn't repeat again. As he got to the infirmary, he felt the desire for more power rising inside him again. He knew that his father was crippled by the army in some way and could no longer train his body. This crippling had also affected his limbs, causing him to limp often and stay up many nights due to the pain. He had dreamed of developing the healing spell by watching healers in the infirmary and using it to heal his father. But, he was sorely disappointed when the spell that was observed by Phenomena Analysis Module 2 turned out to be like the advanced teleportation spell, which required him to reach the level of an eminent human mage first. Also, on asking the system, he had found out that this spell was not capable of healing his father's condition. For that purpose, he required a spell of a much higher level. Hence, all of the intentional scrapes and injuries that he had sustained to observe the healers at the infirmary had gone to waste, but he was still glad because he had found a direction, the library. He had heard from one of the healers that the library housed records of many spells up to the exalted human mage level. Of course, although written records were much less effective than personal teaching, they were still stored because spells had many variations. One person could control the elementary particles in one way to result in a spell, whereas others could control them in a different way to achieve the same effect. This did not mean that one of them was wrong. In fact, both of them were correct. Spells were something that a mage could only be guided in. In the end, it was his own intuition and will that would shape the spells he would use. Since then, Daniel had tried to get to those records in the library, but he had been restricted. His status as a first-year student was not enough, and he had been constantly looking for ways to get access. Now, finally, he could read the whole library. Dropping Faxel off at the infirmary and making sure he was in good hands, he rushed over to the library and started a phenomena that he would be known for years to come. Each day, he would come to the library at the crack of dawn. He would stand at the podium for 9 hours, making book after book appear in his hands while he just opened a page in each. Then, legs shaking, he would make his way to the infirmary where he would have lunch together with Faxel, who needed 3 days of rest. It seemed that the trio had gone overboard this time, as Laravel had just been humiliated and defeated by Daniel in the assessment. His ribs had been broken and his arm had been fractured, and because the healers here were nowhere near the level of the one he had seen in the Fists of Justice training hall, Faxel needed to stay for 3 days to get back to normal. Then, it was back to the podium for another 9 hours, before trudging to bed wearily. His face became sunken and his eyes gradually turned hollow, as if he was morphing into a ghost. Even in his dreams, books hounded him, chasing him while ripping pages off of themselves and throwing them at him. 5 days went by in this fashion. Each day, people would be shocked left and right seeing a kid who seemed to have not slept for years. He stared into the distance while he walked, as if something imaginary was floating in front of him. Finally, on the 6th day, the last book went by his hands, which were peeling by now. He collapsed at the podium and had to be carried back to his room by Faxel, who had been alerted of the fact by a well-wisher. Daniel slept for a full day, not even waking up to go to the bathroom or eat anything. The academy had given all the students 7 days to be assigned to a master. A typical student would inquire with the academy regarding which masters were experts in the focus they had chosen. Then, they would drop by all of the available masters in the order of their reputation before finally being selected by one. Masters usually tested students in case they had low comprehension levels. As for those in the top grade class, many masters vied for each student, making it so that in the end, the student could choose which master they could go with. Typically, the masters with the most reputation were chosen because of their track record in successfully guiding a student to pass in as less time as possible. It was the last day for students to hand in their chosen master's name to the academy. There was a very strict policy that any student who did not hand in the name would be expelled from the academy with immediate effect. Of course, this hadn't happened in many years, because all of the students who could even gain entry to the academy in the first place were quite talented in their own right. There were only 6 hours left till the time would be up, but Daniel was still snoring in his bed. Faxel could be seen inside the room, scratching his head as he tried to think of more ways to wake him up. He had done everything he could. He had even poured a bucket of water on him, but the only result was the bed getting wet. Finally, Faxel decided that he had no option but to beat Daniel awake. He, himself, had not found a master, and he suspected that this was again tied to the prince. He had visited each and every master as soon as he got out of the infirmary, but they had all rejected him, saying that his comprehension was too low. What was disconcerting was that one master had accepted a student who had the same comprehension right in front of him. The cunning smile from the master had made everything clear. Thus, he had walked back to the student quarters and had waited for Daniel to come back to discuss about what could be done. On arriving with that same gaunt face, Daniel had assured him that there was a master who would take them both in. Together, they had gone to search for the master that Kellier had spoken of right after Faxel had gotten out of the infirmary. It hadn't been hard to find the master's quarters, as there was only one master in the academy who fit the description of genius who lost everything, as Kellier had said. The room had been empty, so they had no choice but to leave a note with Daniel's dorm room. If no developments were made even on the last day before the deadline, Daniel and Faxel decided to go to the academy council and find the location of that master. This could only be done on the last day as a last resort, as the council was only convened on special occasions like the master acceptance ceremony that would take place after the deadline. Otherwise, the council members could not be found on the grounds of the academy. Now, the time was ticking to an end and there was no sign of this master that Daniel had spoken of. If they wanted to find the location and get the acceptance letter, they would have to hurry. All he could do was hope that at least physical pain would wake him up. Just as he raised his hand, preparing to punch Daniel in the stomach, a strong smell of alcohol wafted in from the door that was open. Although Faxel wondered who was drinking at this time in the morning, he chose to ignore the smell before raising his hand again to punch Daniel as hard as he could. An instant before the impact, a man staggered into Daniel's room and hiccuped loudly. He had a bottle of wine in his hands, and he seemed young, definitely not even 30 years old. His face was gaunt, just like Daniel's had been before he had fallen asleep, and his strong features were masked by the stubble that was present on his face. He was wearing an open shirt, through which Faxel saw many more bottles tucked away in his trousers. After walking in, he looked at the two inside before promptly vomiting on the floor near Daniel's bed. Daniel was woken up by one of the vilest stenches he had ever smelled in his life. His happy dream of burning the library down was interrupted as he had no choice but to wake up and move away from the god-awful smell. Daniel clutched the blanket to his nose and moved to the corner of the room to get away from the smell. The man who entered didn't even seem embarrassed, simply hiccuping again and saying, "You brats left a note at my quarters? Couldn't you just wait there? I was just restocking my drinks." Taking another swig from the bottle in his hands, he nonchalantly crossed the puddle of vomit and promptly fell asleep where Daniel had just been sleeping. It seemed that the concepts of personal hygiene and manners were foreign to this man, as he simply started snoring as if it were his own bed. Feeling the urge to go to the bathroom bursting inside him due to sleeping for 24 hours straight, Daniel ran to the side and relieved himself. Noticing that he himself was starting to stink, he bathed after asking Faxel to grab some food from the cafeteria that was free for all students. Finally, after filling his stomach and feeling alive again, Daniel hurriedly shook the man. There wasn't much time left for the deadline. His snores continued unabated while the shaking had no effect. But as he was shaking, Daniel noticed 2 pieces of parchment sticking out of the man's pocket. Taking them out, he was happy to see that they were the acceptance letters for the 2 of them. They decided to submit the letters first, before deciding what to do next. Located near the library was a building which housed the administrative wing of the academy. It was the clerk here who had helped them in finding the master's home before. With expressions of relief on their faces, they handed in the acceptance letters. It had really been a close call. so he came to find you after all? Pity what happened to him, said the clerk, Felicia, who had also seen Daniel's performance in the assessment. Just as the system had said, being applauded by the crowd had made his name become known far and wide, at least in the academy. Most commoners and even staff had a soft corner for him, and they even tried to help him when none of the nobility or their cronies were watching. This was also the reason behind someone intimating Faxel that Daniel had collapsed in the library. Although the changes in their attitude were slow, they were still there, which made Daniel feel happy. Now, he had to figure out a way to use this shift in attitude to his advantage. Meet me outside in 10 minutes. My shift is up, she said, before winking at the two of them. Felicia was a pretty woman who seemed to be 23 to 25 years old. She was a bit on the plump side, with cute cheeks and a hooked nose. She actually reminded Daniel of his mother when she was younger, so he had been comfortable in speaking with her since the day he had come to the building to ask why he wasn't allowed further into the library. Waiting outside, he asked Faxel, there have been no new announcements about the awards given to the top 3 in the assessment, right? Seeing Faxel shake his head, Daniel heaved a sigh, feeling glad that what he had dreaded hadn't come true. Although he had been granted full access to the library as the award, it was possible that the announcement might be rescinded. After all, he had no contact with the court mage and he did not know how much of a sway his words had at the academy. If someone from the nobility noticed that this was actually much more valuable than the other gifts, unlike what the others thought, complaining to the king or a minister might cut off his access. The library was too important to him, and he could not take the risk. Hence, he had put aside everything and disregarded all the pain to devour the library as soon as possible. It was better to be cautious than to feel sorry later. Of course, the flood of notifications regarding the numerous spells that were ready for development had made him rejoice, feeling that he had made the right choice after all. Soon, the clerk appeared with a basket of cookies and offered some to them before saying, "Do you know what happened to the poor guy?" Seeing them both shake their heads, she continued. Jonah Castle tested for Crimson Comprehension 12 years ago. Although he looks like that, he is only 24 years old. With such legendary potential, he was the envy of all and he got the best resources because of being in the legendary batch. He passed out in just 4 years and entered the army, where he rose to the level where there were only 4 people above him in the whole army. All this he accomplished in just 8 years. He was set to become one of the youngest court mages in the history of Lonthaner, with even the present court mage and the king praising him multiple times in public gatherings. Then, disaster struck. His sister was accidentally killed by a prince who had been drunk and wouldn't take no for an answer when he made advances on her. Although she repeatedly screamed that Jonah was her brother, the guards ignored her and beat her to death. Enraged, Jonah went on a killing spree, beheading all of the guards. But when he got to the palace to take revenge on the prince, the king stopped him. He said that it was a mistake and that killing the guards should be enough. A sad expression came upon Felicia's face as she told the story. Tears swam in her eyes, and she seemed to be struggling not to cry. In his rage, he defied the king. He was captured by the court mage even though he had been his teacher. When he was imprisoned, his family was killed mysteriously by robbers. The whole affair reeked of something fishy. Some people said that he was planning on defying the king even before the incident with his sister. Due to heartbreak over the events, his comprehension slipped to red grade. What surprised everyone was that he still chose to stay at the academy as a teacher. After vowing that he would not oppose the king, he was allowed to do whatever he wished. Although he may be gruff on the outside, he has a great heart. Just give him some time, she said, before smiling sadly at the two of them and leaving on seeing that they were lost in thought. Daniel was especially scared. The man had defied the king, and his family had been killed without mercy. Even the court mage had had to act against his own student, but Daniel suspected that this was because of the oath. Like the king had said, he was still an ant right now, and he was practically no threat. But what if he defied the king openly later, when he was more powerful? The same might happen to him. Thus, his primary priority right now was to find a way to sneak his parents out of the kingdom or to get them to a safe location. He had to do this while simultaneously building a faction secretly to oppose the king in the future. And what better location was there for this purpose than the academy, which was filled with the brightest talent in the whole kingdom? Setting his goals clearly in his mind, he eyed Faxel, who was beside him, still lost in thought from the incredible story. Daniel thought back to each and every instant that he had been with Faxel so far. As he did so, he noticed that he had developed an instinct which told him whether or not to trust someone based on his experiences with them. Of course, although this instinct was still developing, it had already shown its worth when he had chosen to trust Kellier, prompting the system to award the achievement. Now, he decided that Faxel would be one of the leaders of the faction he would build. Although his friend was lacking in social skills, his determination to work towards a goal was really something to be admired. Daniel knew that whatever mission he gave to Faxel, he would do his best to fulfill it in any way possible. Unexpectedly, the system spoke at this moment. Secret condition met, 2 allies decided. Faction Module 1 unlocked. 100 EXP awarded. Faction Module 1, one official faction can be created with a maximum of 20 members. Host can now use the faction tools that are available in the system store. Additional faction tools have been unlocked. The notification made Daniel smile as he remembered all the incredible tools he had seen in the store. He had decided to start the faction first and then inquire as to how to use them, but the system had given the answer now itself. Faxel, who had just awoken from his thoughts, had a puzzled expression on his face, seeing a glint pass through Daniel's eyes. They were the eyes of a lion eyeing the prey that it would soon consume. Seeing that Faxel was eyeing him from the corner of his eye, Daniel put away the thoughts that had started after hearing the notification from the system. He would have to make a trip to the Yellow Comprehension batch very soon. Coughing to break the awkward atmosphere, Daniel led the way back to their rooms. Although Faxel simply followed, he was still wondering as to what exactly his friend had been thinking to make such an expression appear on his face. Even before reaching the room, the sound of snores greeted them as they made their way up the stairs. Master Jonah was still sleeping soundly on his bed, and the reek from the vomit had started to emanate outside. Due to the large quarters being mostly empty, Daniel and Faxel had chosen side-by-side rooms in a wing where there were no one else present. Daniel closed his nose before opening the window and casting a gust spell to drive out the stink. Then, he made ice appear on the ground, freezing the vomit and choosing to deal with it later. Finally, he bent down and screamed with all his might in the man's ears. "My astier, juahuana ha." Eh? As if being pleasantly woken up from sleep, Master Jonah first looked around the room before staring at both of them. Then, he checked his pockets to take out another wine bottle before noticing that the 2 letters had vanished. "I guess you two have handed in the acceptance letters. I won't be at the ceremony, so don't bother attending alone and being embarrassed when the council member calls out our names. If you want something, come find me at my cabin," he said, before groggily getting up and walking out of the room. His slurred voice was quite deep, echoing in the room as the 2 watched on. "What would you do to take revenge on the king?" Daniel asked suddenly, startling Faxel, who had never expected Daniel to broach the matter of the master's past in this way. Master Jonah, who had reached the door, suddenly turned around. His expression, which had been one of inebriation, had suddenly morphed into one of utter solemnity on hearing Daniel mention the king. The drunken visage was gone, replaced by one of absolute seriousness as his eyes shone with the craftiness of a fox. "I would wait and bide my time until I can take down the whole government in one fell swoop." Seeing the smile on Daniel's face, Jonah smiled back before returning to the lackadaisical attitude of one thoroughly drunk. Daniel had suspected that this man must not have given up like the image he portrayed to everyone. Now, his suspicions were confirmed. As he walked out with the same staggering steps, Daniel felt something odd in the air. Switching to elementary sight, his jaw dropped seeing the incredible sight that followed his now master as he walked to the stairs. As his body moved through the myriad particles that suffused the air, many of the particles moved aside seemingly of their own volition. These particles definitely weren't being controlled, because it was easy to spot when one was deliberately controlling particles. This was because the rigid movements that replaced the free, floating dance of a typical elementary particle were quite easy to notice. At least, this was what Daniel had been taught so far. As for Master Jonah, his steps seemed to have a certain rhythm in them which caused the particles to move away on their own. Noticing this pattern, Daniel was shocked out of his mind as he had never even imagined that one could move particles in this way. This was true connection. In front of this, what Daniel and the other mages did looked like some children's game. True connection meant that particles would move by simply being coaxed, instead of having to be forced to move like what had been taught to them. Turning around in the corridor and seeing Daniel looking at him with shock on his face, Jonah winked before disappearing in the air. Suddenly seeing the man vanish, Daniel snapped out of the shock before decided to reorder his priorities again. He had to visit this man and find out just how the hell it was possible to have such magnificent control. This was definitely not the method taught in Lonthaner, and Daniel needed to know where this technique came from. There was no response from Phenomena Analysis Module 2, hence it meant that he still needed to observe the technique more. His master was definitely not a simple man. Yet, such natural control of particles felt oddly familiar. This feeling only dawned upon Daniel because he had been reminded of the first time he had truly been awed by magic. The Firewind Dragon. That was something that he could never forget. To make sure if his peculiar feeling was correct, he decided to ask the system. Was the technique to control particles I just watched similar to the one used to control the Firewind Dragon? After analysis of Host's encounter with the Firewind Dragon, it has been deduced that there is a 70% similarity between the effects that were observed in both phenomena. With present information, system cannot ascertain whether this is the result of a similar spell technique. Spell technique. Daniel had learnt this concept but had put it aside after hearing that there was only one technique in the kingdom of Lonthaner. Spell techniques were frameworks, or rule books, by which any spell was designed. In Lonthaner, the technique was to connect with particles first, after which a mage would send particular instructions to make the particles act in a certain way to bring out the desired effect. His suspicion had been right. This phenomena was just too startling to go unnoticed, especially now when he was in possession of elementary sight and had already trained in year as a mage. Connecting to as many air particles as he could in front of him, Daniel walked forward, trying to emulate what he had just seen. A blinding headache suddenly assaulted him, making him fall to the ground as a watching Faxel ran over to see what was wrong. His forehead felt like it was on fire, but Daniel couldn't help but feel joyful on hearing the system's sweet voice. Threshold particle limit reached. Host is undergoing breakthrough to first-grade amateur human mage.